Yeager.
Yes.
Calhoun. Woodward.
Here.
Gorham.
Here.
And Duval.
Present, thank you. All rise, pledge allegiance. You got somebody on board? All right, I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, that's item 4, looking for a motion to approve or amend the agenda for tonight's meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, Yeager motion, Gorham second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, we're at approval of the minutes from our regular meeting held on November 17th. I'm looking for a motion to approve that.
So move, Yeager.
Second.
And Gorham second. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed, same sign. Those are approved. We're at old business. And at this point in time, David, could you welcome, I certainly welcome Mike and Jennifer here, and David, could you set this up for us, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what we're here tonight to discuss are kind of some of the miscellaneous items of the code that haven't been discussed at our previous workshops. We were talking about the zoning districts. There are 2 zoning districts. We want to talk about the our industrial districts just briefly, and then the rest of the discussion is going to have an emphasis on the general building design, site design, outdoor lighting, landscape standards for the new code. So that's what we're here to do tonight, and I think we'll just let Jennifer just jump right in.
Awesome. Well, it's good to see you all. It's our last time with you for 2021, and then I'm going to have to learn how to say 2022, which will take me a while if I had to guess.
Unless we're with them tomorrow.
Don't say that. I have to go to Reedstown tomorrow.
No, you don't, do you? Oh,
Yeah, I do.
shoot.
I've got like another. I'm going Southwest Wisconsin tomorrow.
Good luck on
I
that.
Yeah.
know. Let's see if I don't die. Hopefully. So, as David said, we're here tonight to talk about the last remaining base zoning districts, I would call them, because we've got a couple overlay districts that will affect the city. But those are a little bit more nuanced. So, like the PUD, for example, is an overlay district, which you will see in front of you. But this is the last of your base districts. We're also here to talk about some of the design and performance standards. You know, the stuff that usually gets people really hot and bothered. So we'll probably, I'm sure, have a good discussion about that tonight. In full disclosure, me and Word are not best friends, and so when you looked at it and saw the formatting, it's a bit of a nightmare and needs to be cleaned up, and so I just want you guys to know I fully acknowledge that, but it is quite possibly my least favorite software.
You introduced me to a new word, development.
Oh, see, track changes also, like,
It's a new word.
Yeah.
Thanks.
you're welcome, there might be others in there.
Yeah, that's
Track
the one I
changes
picked
and
up on.
spell check don't like each other.
They do not like each other at all. And so, with that, I'm just, it's this, not my computer. All right. So, real quickly, we've got a meeting tentatively scheduled with the technical advisory group for January 6th. That group includes staff, and we're gonna look at a map and start really making sure that we've got the right zoning. We've got a draft zoning map done, but we're gonna sit down with staff and see where we think it should go, and then obviously that map will be back in front of you. We're also going to talk through some of the allowed uses, that section, because that's often difficult to do sort of by group. So we'll bring that back to you once we have that sort of what I call a speed session with staff, and by speed I mean 4 hours long. So in case anyone's interested in listening, you totally could. We will be doing another session where we look at the full code. Obviously, that date's to be determined based on how the meeting on the 6th goes and how much work we have left to do. But obviously, we've made a lot of progress in terms of getting this done, and then we'll eventually get a public hearing scheduled. So that's what's coming up. So tonight, just a refresher, our outline that we put together for your document is pretty straightforward, and it's really intended to synthesize the information that's within the zoning section itself. So tonight we're going to finish up zoning districts. And then we are going to jump into the general building development and design standards. So those are the two sections we're looking at. So with that, I tried to be really short. You said you're next.
Okay, I'll go next. We're not gonna talk about this. We're not gonna talk about that, unless somebody wants to. So, one of the areas that we really haven't, and again, this is probably gonna get back down to mapping, but, and I would like to note that we are now old business on their agenda.
I know, I saw that.
I know, so that was interesting.
I like it and I don't.
We're just old.
Mature,
Yeah, okay, that's it.
mature business.
We did have a couple of outlying areas, northeast, and then the Mills area on the southwest. And so from the general perspective of those being areas that might develop at some point in the future, we're suggesting those get zoned RL1, which is basically, you know, equivalent of a holding district to a certain extent, until which such time the market pushes either one of those things in another direction, then probably think about a TN3 application, or maybe a TN3 with some additional standards or something. So that was the thought on that. And any questions about that?
That was also came out of some of the discussion we had with the city council during their workshop in, what month is that, October? Was to keep those kind of as base as possible, and then let the market drive what they will become.
So that's the thought for now, and you know, we won't get into any other details about specific standards until sometime there's a development. And you're going to want to deal with rezoning anyway at that point, so you kind of control the process. Again, here we are with our, this is a little hard to see, but anyway, the idea that we're going to talk about industrial districts tonight. I'm going to briefly go over those. Right now you have a light industrial and a general industrial, and we're sort of switching that up a little bit, so we'll see how the crowd responds to that. As Jennifer mentioned, we've pretty much gone over all the base districts with everybody except for the PUD, which is an overlay. And then again, we're way over to the right here. We're looking at industrial and what we're also calling a new district that's sort of a evolution of light industrial, and we're calling it maker and employment district. I would call it not light, I would refer to it more as quiet industrial. And we'll get into some of the thoughts about that. The idea here is we would have one general industrial district, and we'll push the standards down so that it basically absorbs what was considered light. It's just sort of one category, and then the maker and employment district would be a little more, again, it's somewhat synonymous with light, but it's types of uses that could be comfortable and fit in downtown, like you have now already, that are more focused on small crafters, like, you know, there's a door manufacturer down here and a cabinet maker and you know, t-shirt operations, those kinds of things that are probably not retail based, but they're not really heavy industry either. So crafters and makers that, you know, can exist in a certain place. So that's just the intro to the maker and employment district. Again, the lot size kind of is equivalent to what the light industrial was, minimum lot width, and then setbacks that are more compatible to being able to put a discrete building or reuse a discrete building in say the downtown environment, say to the east of downtown. Height, minimum floor area, all those kinds of things are pretty much similar to what we saw and what you have in light industrial today. The idea that these buildings could push up towards the front. Typically on your industrial buildings, you've got a fairly large yard, parking area. Most industrial buildings are a lot of them are front loaded, even have loading docks in the front, parking, impervious surface, those kinds of things. But the idea here is, in just looking at, say, the lumber company, the idea here, that's a fairly good-looking building, except for one thing, there's hardly any glass at all. So the idea that we could add some design standards here that have a minimum glazing requirement, somewhere in the 25 to 50% range, so that it kind of fits in, so this kind of maker and employment district fits in a little bit better with what's going on in downtown to a certain extent. But also you've got some businesses like this. I don't know if this Dixon's Place is still operating or not. But the notion that there's a building like that fits in downtown, it's not loud, obnoxious.
Except for the dog.
Well, except for the dog
Does
on.
someone live there?
No,
Oh.
no.
That's what I thought.
No, I went by there tonight. There's no way. Somebody's living in there?
Doesn't look,
It's not Dixon anymore, right?
it's, it's,
No.
I can't remember his name. We know
We digress.
And
we move on.
It's a really nice grill. That's what,
Uh-huh.
that's
We move
what
on.
I'll say.
Oh, if we wanna go like live work unit, we could do that. I like that.
I did see someone use a special knock to get in the door.
Oh, they do a special,
Oh,
okay.
that's so great.
Anyway, so the idea that,
Is there a mural of the dog on the building?
no,
Is that a
we
performance
noticed that.
standard?
Yeah, yes.
That's a sign ordinance violation. So the idea that we've got something that's a district that would accommodate, not your typical commercial retail businesses in an environment that is a little more compatible with what's there. Does that make sense?
Mike, I think even a more clearer example is a place called Minnesota Makerspace, which is on 7th Street, right
Yep.
across from the Bridge of Harmony.
Yep.
And they've run into problems with trying to do some things that are industrial
Yep.
and, kind of running into neighbors and things like this, but it's a great business, it's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
They certainly wouldn't fit into the 1,000 square feet. Well, maybe they have 1,000 square feet. But, so it's happening already.
Okay, well, so do we need to amend that a little bit? It's 1,000 square.
Is there a reason to have the 1,000
Well,
square feet?
I
Well,
would
like I
say-
said, it's left over from light
I
industrial.
would say, well, first of all, that's part of that, I think that would be for any new building.
Right.
There's existing
Okay.
buildings, obviously. And again, like Minnesota Makerspace, that's gonna be not in that downtown, so it won't be in this.
Right.
But yeah, if they wanted to expand, this would probably be a place for them. I actually find it interesting that this is coming up tonight, considering that I actually just received, after I'd gone home for dinner, an email inquiring as to whether the old Just for Kicks building could be used for light manufacturing. So. Anyway.
What does that mean?
I don't
How do you
know.
define
I
that?
have not reached out back out to ask them what they mean by light manufacturing.
Much
But I'm
power do
saying-
they need?
50 megawatts. So that's the other variable or criteria here is what do we do with the use table with this kind of a district? We might be a little lighter on some of the industrial uses than not. But again, it's the idea of supporting smaller operations, incubators, startups that aren't like, don't have a cash register and a sales floor kind of thing.
So just to follow up on what I heard David say, this would not apply to Main Street?
No, it would not.
This is its own. This would be its. This is its own zoning district.
Yeah.
Well, so what, isn't the makerspace on South 7th, the Main Street block, isn't that where
It's part of the town center.
that town center, am I getting them mixed up again?
Main
Probably.
Street, Main Street's,
Yes, and then
yeah.
town center is
Beyond.
is the donut itself.
Yes,
So, does that create problems for us there?
I'm not saying that Makerspace wouldn't qualify to be on Main Street.
right.
Because that was the example I thought. When I looked at this, I was beginning to think about, is this a kind of district that you would carve out a space, and that is the use, or would you treat it more like an overlay and say that within, I might have that? I don't know if that's more hard to administer.
So I'll just address one thing I wanted to say. I think maybe to help clarify with things like Makerspace is how I would define Makerspace is a little more. They're not quite retail, but they're a little more experience-based. You go there to maybe do a thing. He is not, his business model isn't, I make something and then, to which I then either sell directly to clients or to a third party. So I wouldn't really call Chris manufacturing like that. I think when I see what would go in here, it's kind of that like fabrication, furniture making, that kind of thing that maybe doesn't have a large impact to the surrounding area. I like what how Mike kind of called it, quiet industrial. You're not hearing banging or it's not.
No steel bending or fabrication, stuff like that. And again, we can control that with the use table, but the idea that you're not getting a giant truck and trailer delivery and offloading rolls of steel or stuff like that.
So I guess maybe what we're looking forward to tonight is A, do we like this concept, and then B, are there any kind of guidelines, performance standards, uses that maybe you would not want to see in this district, or do you do kind of see would be going in here, if you want us to continue to pursue a district like this. I also like to hear from Tiffany and Kelly on that as well. Is there a boundary? Cabinet making's fine. Machine shop not fine. Like, kind of that level.
And again, it's going to be part of the challenge and opportunity is how we map it.
Right, that's where I'm struggling is that.
Sure.
That part of how
Yeah.
we would map that.
Yeah.
If the purpose is that it's gonna accommodate, businesses that are appropriate for the town center and the neighborhood business areas, then I'm trying to think about
Yeah.
how I would actually carve out a space that says this is ME1, which sent me down, and maybe it just becomes an overlay with some additional uses approved, then you'd say, okay, this box or this box.
Yep, and if you think about downtown, we had this discussion a little while back about how the west part of downtown is more sort of the government and county campus, and it's got a pretty unique identity and visibility to it. The east side of downtown, east of 8th, it's a little bit different character. You've got building supply. You've got this guy that is taking care of lawnmowers and snowmobiles. Some of them are just sort of sitting out there. But, and so, I don't see downtown evolving to the east to, do that. We want to preserve and reinforce Main Street, Laurel, and we've got a district for that. So, again, and then we've got town center that, again, this could, and this doesn't necessarily have to be in downtown either. It could be in other locations. It could be, one of the corridors, or it could be south of here, or wherever. So,
And would this be like a Franklin Arts Center kind of a thing as well? And when I'm trying to think about what you meant by the neighborhood business areas.
Yeah,
And how we would put that in there, and is that a Franklin become an ME1 or?
I think one thing that differentiates this is, in my mind, is retail does not have to be an essential part.
yeah.
It's kind of what Mike said. It doesn't have to. You don't have to have a sales floor. You might just purely make your product here. You run your business out of here, and you sell to third parties online.
So, like one of the T-shirt shops on, is it Front Street? They're just printing T-shirts, right? I mean, you're not walking in and buying one off the rack, right? So that's that's basically an employment use. They may have a delivery that gives them 1,000 white T-shirts, but, I don't think they're getting it's probably not a lot of noise or aggravation being generated out of that place. But it's operating in a B3 district. So, And we might be able to just, handle that in some ways, so.
I think the difference between allowing it as a use on a use table and saying we like the idea of this is that you would concentrate it of where you want it, right? You wouldn't be doing like a one-off, as opposed to on the use table, someone walks in and goes, well, I can do anything on the use table if it's conditionally permitted or it's permitted. So the idea is, is there a collection of parcels or is there an area where this fits? And you want to continue that sort of pattern. And that, to me, that's the difference between saying, it's on the use table, because there might be some things that are on the use table for town center that would cross over with this. But, it's a laundry list and people can pick anything in the laundry list. This is more, in this area, it's an employment district or area, it has a certain character and feel, so we're zoning that particular area and collection of parcels for it. So to me, that's the difference. And so then it's really a mapping exercise of where is it and where are you reinforcing it into the future?
Yeah, and I think, and these are a couple of good examples, because we want to be a little more performance-based with the town center district than that. Here we're allowing a little more flexibility. You can put your machines that are being serviced out front. You can have a bigger front yard. You can have a whatever that we really would like to not reinforce in the rest of the town center areas. So that's another distinction, some of the yards and performances areas.
Some feedback. I like the idea, directionally, I think it's heading in the right direction, to provide for the establishment of small startups, incubators. Startups, they don't have it all figured out right away. You don't step into a cookie cutter business. Life's not like that. It's messy. And so this allows for some of that, adjustment while still providing some minimum standards. So I like that idea. Whether these numbers are all exactly the right numbers,
Yeah.
we can work through that,
Yeah.
obviously later. But personally, I like the direction of this.
Mr. Chair? Yes.
I would basically just echo Tad's point here. I think we're generally going the right way. One thing that comes to my mind when I'm thinking about this is a lot of these places get to where they are and look the way they are because of the buildings already are existing there. They're inexpensive to move into. So we may create this district, but the likelihood that an M&E is gonna come in there, build a building from scratch and meet these standards, I think is fairly low, personally. I think there's a reason why we see those types of buildings in the places that they are. So I think we just need to be cognizant that that's probably gonna continue, right? Now, if we had a district sitting somewhere where there were a lot of existing buildings that could be affordably bought and would be a natural place for these to nestle in, it makes perfect sense. But as a global statement, I'm in favor of this M&E district.
And it may be, Mr. Chair, that we can calibrate this within the town center piece as well, kind of what you were talking about in terms of an overlay, but being able to address, but I still think there's a mapping component to it to a certain extent.
A lot of these, they're living in the building while they're running their business out of there. So that's part of that's part of the economic component of how these get going and
Yep.
sustain, right? They're able to. So.
I can neither confirm or deny that anyone is living in any building.
I'm just speaking in real terms here of how these M&Es get going and exist and then
Yeah.
continue to keep going. They're,
Okay, so any other thoughts or comments here?
How big would you imagine this district being? Are we talking 2 blocks, 4 blocks, 8 blocks? Help me imagine that.
It's a good question. Maybe 4 blocks.
Okay.
know, and again, I think we have to be purposeful about that. Is that really what we want to see over here? Or does it work better as an overlay, or does it work better as a component of the town center, or? Because mostly east of 8th, those are mostly one-story buildings over there, and they're kind of scattered a little bit, and some mainly, you know, the two buildings right next to the old Thrifty White, I mean, something could be done with those, you know, in a way that you don't have to have a retail performance basis for them, so.
I just think we don't want to preclude any other uses coming in. When somebody says, you know, I've got an idea for a housing unit here, but you've already rezoned it, and now you gotta change it so I can put an apartment building in. That's all. So I kinda like the idea of the flexibility of the overlay. It's just a thought. I think this is not a deliberate thing, that sites like this is opportunity, like Kevin said, it's opportunity. It's cheap land, I don't need to have people walking into this business. It's cheap, way cheap, and what the
I
heck.
could live there if I had to.
Yeah, if I have to, I could live there, exactly.
Well, we could add to the standards and allowable uses. And maybe that's a good way to put it from an economic perspective, maybe using this district as a tool to maintain entry thresholds in terms of prices of buildings, how they can be used, as opposed to the market turning over a side. So it's another way to think about it. All right, sounds good. Otherwise, your light industrial and your general industrial districts get lumped into what we're calling general industrial, and that basically would accommodate what both of those districts do today. So we would reduce the minimum lot area, lot width is 100, setbacks are pretty much the same as they were.
So part of where this came from, having a discussion with Jennifer and Mike, is if you look at the zoning map, especially, this is 90% of our industrial property is in industrial park. And if you look at the zoning map right now, it's like County Road 45, it's like east half, I-2, west half, I-1. There really isn't that much difference between I-1, I-2, beyond heavy manufacturing, which I don't really see why on one side of the road you allow it, one side you don't. And so this is where it kind of comes down to, just call it all industrial. Throughout the park, it's not that some lot, you know, the I-1 lot, I-2 lots are bigger than the I-1 lots. They're all kind of the same size throughout the industrial park. Doesn't limit us on development and redevelopment down in the industrial park. When it comes to uses, you know, I think we'll as we go to the use table, it'll probably mostly stay the same to what I-2 and I-1 is now. You know, in I-2 right now it says everything that's in I-1 plus these like extra 3 things. Yeah. And so maybe those more heavy industrial things become more like conditional uses where, hey, if you're gonna come in and want to do, you know, I'm gonna do a coal power plant, well, that's gonna be a conditional use, and we're gonna really dive into that use before we allow it, versus just, you know, regular manufacturing.
Or data mining facility.
Data mining facility, distribution
Decentralized
center, things like that, which
Coal-powered Bitcoin.
belong in an industrial park.
Right.
Pervious surface, do we need pervious surface on this?
So with all of these, the impervious in our industrial districts there is no.
I just didn't see it on this, so I saw it on the last one, but I didn't
Yeah,
see it.
there is no impervious surface requirements under industrial districts. What comes in play instead is stormwater.
Okay,
So
that was gonna be my question. If you don't control impervious, do you control storm?
we do control
Right,
stormwater.
and
And that
we-
falls under the city engineer.
And we would probably put that on, it needs to be on the, we put it on the table anyway, like you said,
Yeah.
it was on the other one, so.
Yep.
It's probably just a miss by me.
We've got the front yard setback at 40. What's the history or the rationale with some of the setbacks here? And whether we would want to maybe make those smaller counter to what Mr. Yeager is getting at, if you do a stormwater plan, these are already set-aside areas by and large in the industrial park, and why not build it out to the maximum capacity possible? So when we think about some of the setbacks, I think the residential one makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
But some of the others, what
Talking about like the front yard setback?
front yard, side yard, rear yard?
Well, and that's a good question. And I think if you look at most of the more intense industrial uses, they're probably set back further than that. Because like, again, they may have a loading dock out front, they may have parking, they may have, you know, in some cases there's storage out there. So they're configuring their site to work for their operations. So this is the minimum front yard, and I think it probably harkens back to a time when we went, it's an industrial building, we gotta push it back, and so we could probably relax that.
My understanding on a lot of that industrial stuff is it's fire safety driven also. Bigger buildings, bigger fires.
Yeah,
that
that's a
kind of
good point.
thing.
And again, I like what Mike also said too, especially if you look at like our industrial park lots, very few of them have multiple street frontages unless they're on a corner.
Yeah.
And so if they're bringing in big 53-foot semi-trailers, they don't want to have them to go to the back of the building and kind of come around. They just want to be able to pull straight up to the front of the building and straight out.
But I mean, if we had say we changed the front yard setback to 25, I would think most of the larger operators are gonna probably push back anyway for whatever reason that works for their building, whether it's truck movements or deliveries or, you know, whatever it is.
This does allow them to put parking in the front though, so that's the one thing I can see is if you force this setback that far back, it's almost a certainty that your parking is gonna end up in the front.
Which you could also though, if it was the commission and the council's desire that even, you know, again, these are industrial districts, they're not necessarily designed to look pretty.
Yeah.
But if you say that, you know, we really would prefer parking behind buildings, that can also just be a performance standard that says in this district, all, you know, parking apart from X amount for customers will be in the rear. That can just be a simple performance standard.
And back to the notion of size, and you know, here's a couple of examples where we got a smaller building right next to a much larger facility that has an outdoor storage on one side of it. But you can see these setbacks are much greater than 40 feet. And sometimes they may be 80 or 100, just depending on, again, what's the use and how they're using the site. But I think we can easily calibrate these numbers too if we feel like we need to do that.
But these setbacks are basically how close you're able to build. So it's your building envelope. So
Right,
if you
that's
said
the
it's
building envelope.
25,
Right.
those buildings could be close to, it's 25, but
Yeah.
you're allowing the flexibility of that space to be used, but the person that's building on that site gets certainly to choose, do they want to put their structure
Yeah, they want to put it
closer or not?
further forward or back,
So
or
it gives
further
them an
back.
option that you're not automatically taking a tenth of
Right.
an acre or something and just writing it off the books. Could be floor
Yeah,
space on a,
40, you know, you asked what's the history behind that. I bet you couldn't find an industrial building at 40-foot setback. I bet you couldn't
Just-
find one.
just practice is defined.
Because it's either gonna be much further back or it's gonna be a different,
That being said, I
Set
don't
up.
think there's no issue with if the desire would be, let's give them as big of a building envelope as possible.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any problem reducing it to say 20,
Forcing
25
them to
feet.
build to that 25,
Yeah.
that's a
that'd be
different thing.
problematic. But
Yeah.
what you're saying is, I don't want you to encroach onto the public right of way any more than this. So, it's a point of thought or whatever, not necessarily something.
You know, the other thing to think about in terms of these particular dimensions is, for the most part, if not in all cases, the neighbors on the left and the right and behind are other industrial users. So it's not like you're dealing with aesthetics or light or glare or morning deliveries or those kinds of things. And there are some performance standards related to residential, which, you know, we may need to think about a little bit more, since we're combining, if we feel like combining I1, I2 is, and it's a pretty straightforward thing to think about.
Question for David, our current industrial park, the I1s versus I2s, are we short on either of those? Or do we have an abundance sitting out there and we're just still trying to attract industry in?
See, most of the available land right now is all I2. I don't think that has anything to do with people don't want to go to I2. It's more of, we just haven't had any new industrial buildings built. You know, again, phase 4 is mostly our vacant land. It was the last land that was platted and prepped. So that's why it's been the last to develop.
So it seems that, you know, just blending these into a general industrial area, it seems easier and less complex. Where I was questioning as to whether that starts to get lighter industrial use, taking up some of the places that may be better set for intensive industrial.
And I'd say right now with that I2, I2 allows for everything that's in I1 already.
Right. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, the districts are basically nested, so.
Yeah, okay. So that's not a worry.
What else? Anything else? Any questions, thoughts? It sounds like we probably should look at the dimensional standards here a little bit. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So let's shift gears. And what we've got on, is this, okay, yeah, what we've got on the screen are the general building development design standards. And basically what we want to do is look at some of the major changes that we've highlighted in for increments. We're calling them divisions. Are we still calling them divisions?
I don't know.
Okay, all right.
I ran out of hierarchy.
But let's see.
I'll be honest.
Right now they're divisions.
They're divisions right now.
And so we'll throw up each of the 4 divisions: building standards, landscape, lighting, and fences thing are tied together, site, and the last one was, did I say the lighting? Lighting, okay. And then based on the handout you have, we'll walk through some of these major changes and see if we have some agreement on what we're talking about. I think a couple things here to just think about. Consistent definitions. I think there's a word in your code now that these are provisions. And I think that's probably harken back to history. That may be an older term. Maybe we'll think more about requirements or standards. I think provisions is what we're going to need when we make our way back to the Twin Cities tonight, in case we get stranded. But and no, you know, and then the notion of there's, you know, we'll deal with these definitions and some of the terminology as well as we get into some of the details. But the idea of quadrimennium, maybe we just think about retiring that term, you know, and being consistent with duplex, triplex, fourplex, those kinds of things, or multifamily dwelling units, those kinds of things. Do you have anything else to add to that?
I do.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
So, like, something to think about, what I have listed here these are things that carried through all 4 of the divisions. So instead of talking about them every single time we get it, I thought, let's throw it up here. So the first one being, wherever we could, we referenced back to the base district standards. So instead of repeating the standards standard again, it references us back to the table. So, like the accessory building standards, it says, you know, if there's anything in addition to, it has that in this section, but then it references you back to the base zoning district table to make it live in one place instead of multiple. So that's the first, that's just an example, but wherever I could, or wherever we could, we referenced back to those sections, so we're not repeating. The other thing, throughout your code, you kind of use these terms and intermingle them between residential use, and then you also kind of say zoning district R1, R2, and so it's very confusing if you're a user of it to try to figure out, well, so am I in a residential district, or am I in a residential use, or am I, so it's trying to create consistent terminology, especially because we're going and shifting to traditional neighborhood as one of our definitions, and TN2 has both residential and retail types of uses. So as opposed to having multiple definitions, I tried to clean it up. I'm gonna guess it needs another swipe through it because it's so inconsistent in your current code. But essentially what we did is, if it's a single family detached home, it's called a single family detached home. So it has detached with it. Typically, duplex, triplex, and 4+ are actually single family homes, but they're attached. So per the building code, that's usually how they enforce it. So up to a 5, so 4 or less, it's single family attached. Anything 5+, whether it's an apartment, condo, or townhome, is typically multifamily. That's how your building officials look at it, is how the building code is written. So the idea is, let's be as consistent with that as possible to make it easier for your building officials so they know what they're looking at when they get it. So the idea is to try to clean that up as we go through it. So again, I realize it probably needs one more swing through it at least, but that was the idea of why you saw some of those terminology changes as we got through the code. So that's all I have in terms of the overall.
It's very rational, thank you. So, general building design standards, there's a few things here that we're either asking about, suggesting they change, or would have some further clarification from the planning commission. In general, we're adding an accessory dwelling unit, at least in 2 or 3 of the districts, maybe more. So we're adding that language. Single family detached standards, we've got a minimum 20-foot principal structure. I think that's width, right? Minimum width. We're questioning whether we reduce minimum size to 500 square feet. The requirement for a minimum of 1 enclosed garage space, which is in your code for a single family detached unit, is required. I would argue that a little bit as to why we have to require that. Then on the attached single family, minimum 15-foot principal structure width, minimum 500 square foot per unit. Exceptions to size, maybe granted to porches, decks, etc., but I think that's also an encroachment piece that we could address in the dimensional standards, I think. Yeah.
But this is in their current, this is in your current code right now.
Right.
That allows you some flexibility if you want to. Whether or not it should remain or not is up to you guys, but.
Okay.
And the 500 square feet, just for those of you that don't have it memorized, it went from 750, I believe, is the number in your current code. And we reduced it for discussion to 500. After hearing your discussion about tiny houses, yes, no, I mean, I know there are homes that are in your community already that are 500 square feet. And so the idea of, is that something that should continue, and could we have that in other places, essentially? So, but 750 felt like, well, that's not really a tiny, that was my footprint in my house for a long time. So let's get through and then we can talk away.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, you want to just finish up on the right-hand side?
Sure. So, at the city council work session at our last, what was that, November? My dates are all
Early
messed
November,
up.
yeah.
We talked a little bit about the duplex situation, I will call it, or the triplex situation. And the idea that a new duplex is probably, actually everyone seems like I'm fine with a new duplex. It's the conversion of existing single-family detached structures into duplexes, sort of willy-nilly without review approval, without looking at the site, et cetera, that seems to be the biggest issue. So we put some draft language for discussion tonight of, let's call it out specifically, that if you're going to make that conversion, you have to go through site plan review approval, which your zoning administrator will administer. It has to meet the base zoning district standards, otherwise it's not approved. And there have to be some standards around it in terms of, it also kicks in the building materials standards, if you will, because you're coming in for site plan review and you're located within whatever your base zoning district is. So it's not intended to be overly cumbersome, but it is intended to call attention to, you can't just do this without some kind of review process. And you have to have enough parking, you have to have enough lot area, et cetera, to make it work. So
And again, as we discussed at those ones too, it also plays into, again, that base, what is the, talk about shifting, just allowing things to having that discussion of density. Is the density even right to allow it? So it allows us to pretty much, someone would submit an application, right of my office, we would look at, James and I would look at it and say, do you even meet the criteria of your base zoning district? If you don't even meet the basic criteria for even like a single family, then this discussion ends there. And then we go the next step. Do you have enough off-street parking? Do you have, again, are you even, if you did this conversion, would you meet code or not? If you don't, then conversation's over.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Probably not on this discussion as far as conversion, but on another duplex discussion. I used to work for a city that had a lot of duplexes that were owner occupied, so they're a lot line. And the city struggled oftentimes with one half wanted new siding. The other half didn't or couldn't afford it. And so what we ended up seeing as the city of Moundsview was that one half would redo their siding, and now they have James Hardy, and the other half has vinyl. And and we got a lot of complaints at the city. Is there anything in the code that addresses that? I just know in Moundsview it was just a constant battle for the council.
Yeah. And I don't think there's anything in your current code, and I don't think we've addressed it at the moment yet.
We do have language in our code on zero lot line subdivisions,
Okay.
and so right now, we've never, I'll say I've never deal with it, well, dealt with it once. Someone who wanted to do the subdivision.
the other thing I would say is we've got draft language in your standards for homeowners
Yeah,
associations.
I was gonna mention that, yeah.
And right now we-
HOAs, yeah, they're almost always in an HOA, aren't they?
Not
so-
a duplex,
We'd be
though.
requiring them to
But
be
we
an HOA.
could, so right now we say it's 3 or more units, but we could easily say 2, because then there's actually a covenant that's recorded against it that says you 2 have to maintain it. And HOAs can be as complicated or as simple as you want them to be. They don't necessarily have to be, but at least then you'd have a covenant that would be tied to it.
And maybe this isn't an issue here, maybe it never has been, never will be. I just know that in Moundsview, it was a huge issue.
It's a good language to have though, should we ever see future development that goes that direction.
I would guess that the easiest way to track that really would be to create that HOA and reduce it down to anything that's attached, because I think that makes a lot of sense. I've also run into that in other
Attached owner
communities.
occupied.
Zero lot line,
Yeah, because there'll be a management company.
Yep.
Do you have a lot of owner-occupied duplexes here? Do we know?
If they're
If he
owner
makes a
occupied, if they're owner occupied, the owner lives in one half and rents out the other.
Yeah.
But I have heard in, potential developments that duplexes would be a great, great option.
Zero lot line.
Yeah.
Right, zero lot line, owner occupied duplexes.
Yeah.
Non-HOA.
That's
That's what we're saying.
So the HOA gives you the ability to.
Yeah.
And
not worry about that.
And to me, HOA sounds like a burden on a duplex, but it could be something as simple as just a set of covenants that govern maintenance and exterior, whatever, I guess it's the same thing, but.
Honestly, it also helps from an HOA perspective, not what we're discussing tonight, but even see when it even comes to code enforcement. We really haven't had to deal with it, because we don't really have any owner-occupied duplexes, but in the future, you have a duplex and you have be it a property maintenance issue, or even whose side's problem is it? HOA says it's both your problem.
Okay, were we talking about building materials yet? That was what Jennifer was asking about.
So the last thing with building materials is that you have language in your current code about this. All we did was tighten it up a little bit, hopefully, to really try to spell out it. Building materials is always difficult, right? Because just when you think you've covered every material there is, then something else pops up. But the idea is what we're really after is creating interest in a facade through some kind of articulation. Like, you can't have a blank wall of one, right? So it's either units have articulation vertically, so like every unit has a different treatment of some kind that creates some visual interest, or you're dividing between floors. And then there's a list of materials that are associated with that. Mike and I talked about this. Articulation is also hard but it at least has a definition of what it is. Right now you don't have anything in there except for these materials are okay, so to speak. So my understanding of what you've said is you want there to be some distinction between units, and you don't want there to be this same repetitive beige siding, right? That's what I
Maybe
heard.
maybe one unit is siding, one unit's brick, one unit's siding, one unit's brick, something like that.
They may even be able to come up, if it's hardy board, they might even have, like, the top third is one color, the bottom 2/3 is another color, and you have some kind of, front entry and portico, or, you know what I mean? Like something that breaks it up and articulates the facade in some way. But it doesn't have to be that, that's just what I've thrown out, just for discussion.
Can we talk
Yeah.
about the questions that you had, sort of in the comment on the markup draft, was looking at the 20-foot width and thinking about 15 as an option, and maybe I was looking at the earlier draft of the packet that went out, and the other was the 500 square foot footprint.
Couple things, and maybe I'll jump in first. So the 500 square feet, again, that came from the discussion, planning commission had been approached regarding tiny homes. There's also discussion of, we have existing homes in the city that are under 750 square feet. That I don't think we say, ew, we don't want those. Now, with the 500, I think 500 is a good number from a allowable. When you look at actually the Minnesota, I found this out, it's a little 4-page info sheet about tiny homes for the 2020 Minnesota State Building Code. They consider a tiny home being under 500 square feet.
Yeah.
From once the tiny home regulations kick in as well. I feel like 500 square feet is kind of a good stop there. However, one of the things that James and I kind of discussed when it came to tiny homes is maybe we have a discussion of 500 feet is as low as you can go from an allowable perspective, but you could go smaller in the case of maybe a non-conforming lot. We have some random 25-foot lots out there. or through someone who wants to do a tiny home development through a PUD.
Yeah.
Because then they're clustered together, and you don't have a 400 square foot house sandwiched between two 2,500 square foot homes.
So back in October, we heard that proposal for a tiny home village, right, and it was 400 square foot units. You know, and, you know, some of the drawings that they provided us gave you that clustered example that you talked about, David, with some common open spaces, some parking, and community laundry, et cetera, et cetera.
And then in that situation, maybe less than 400 would be appropriate
Right.
in that context.
And in a PUD example, you could navigate your way around this standard because you're in a PUD. Am I thinking
Well,
about
you
that
still have-
correctly?
I think we still need to call it out in the code that we're allowing less than 500.
Well, PUD by its nature though is a
Yeah.
departure from
Yeah.
the dimensional standard, so you don't even really
Yeah.
have to say it.
Yeah.
So I think the way, oh, Mike, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, I'll let you finish.
Well, I guess to the way, that the example that David you gave was, you know, the one would be the non-conforming lot that gets something that would proportionally be workable. You could drop below that 500. Or otherwise you'd be steering, if it's kind of a cluster effect, you'd be steering through the PUD process. And that would be, to me, administratively, a reasonable way to
So
handle it.
then it comes to with the non-conforming, the questions, I would say, two questions, is, do you want it to be allowed on non-conforming? Or is the intent to make a non-conforming lot disappear through essentially be consolidated into neighboring lots?
I think our housing study would tell us probably we want to make use of the non-conforming lot.
Or three. For three, I don't know, but I think we'd have to double check with the attorney, but my gut is on a non-conforming lot, you couldn't say it was permitted. What they would have to do is get a variance from the dimensional standard for the footprint of the house. So, there's still a tool or a mechanism to develop on a non-conforming lot, but I don't think you can just say it's permitted if, you know what I mean?
Well, that's what
But-
our current code says.
Or four,
I don't like it.
I think regardless of how we slice or dice this, I think it would be it seems like it'd be an appropriate statement, I don't wanna create policy here, that tiny houses are an allowable use. You have a food truck overlay ordinance or an ordinance, so why not have a tiny house ordinance? Maybe something that, I don't know if that would work or not, but so that the code doesn't inherently, is an inherent obstacle to being able to do that.
I will say, I think one of, at least from my perspective and James' perspective, anytime we've been talking about tiny homes or small homes, we'll put there, one of the things that on our perspective always has been, one of the assumptions is it's stick-built in place, or maybe even potentially pre-manufactured, but it is on a foundation. We're not talking
Permanent
about.
foundation.
We're not talking about mobile in any way. We're not talking about an RV.
Park
Yeah.
models and all that.
But
Yeah,
it could be on a
apartment
crawl,
models.
Those are so cool.
it could be on a crawl space though, couldn't it?
It could
It's
be.
got a foundation.
No wheels.
Yeah.
No wheels, right.
That's really where you're at.
No
The idea
tracks.
is, it's not a single wide, it's built in place. It looks like a house, it's just small.
So I think what we could do for that, actually, I think we should just add that standard to our building design standards, that all homes have to be on a foundation, or, you know, like,
Yeah.
that's an easy for both. It probably only applies to, but we make it a general standard for any residential structure, then it doesn't matter if it's tiny or if it's big.
So I'll just follow up on that quick. One of the questions James and I had when we were reviewing this topic from our foundations is, does the commission see a need to actually in our code, or in our code, do we actually discuss foundations? Do we want to have a standard for foundation? Because what that future does is it makes it even more clear that certain things are not allowed. So you can't have, what was the term you used, James?
Frost pure foundations.
Yeah, you can't have something up on a block. Has to have a foundation with frost footings, meet building code. What that would further do is actually would eliminate things like modular homes that, you know, were essentially just anchoring down. They're actually built into the foundation.
Actually, that's really, they've changed those manufacturing home rules now, where that's really falls under the manufacturing home statute now.
Yeah.
And modular homes fall into a different part of the statute now because of how they bring them and assemble them in panels on foundations. So they're kind of in two separate.
Yep.
They used to put them together and now they've kind of, from a statutory perspective, separated them. So I think we could easily put, so you won't actually exclude modular homes.
Yeah,
You'd be,
modular's fine.
you'd be
Manufactured.
those would be, fall under a different section of your code essentially.
Modular home is essentially a stick-built home that they build elsewhere.
Yeah,
and
in
then-
panels or
Yeah,
factory,
right,
yeah, or
right.
units,
But
yes.
it's on a regular foundation.
Right. But they used to put it all together.
So, I haven't dived into this yet either, but, so, mobile homes, which are typically manufactured units, you don't have a separate zoning district for those. You do or you don't?
Manufactured housing district.
You do have a district, so that is a discrete thing, and it's boom, that's where it stays, okay.
Although I will say, we probably need to touch base with your city attorney about that because they again changed the rules recently about manufactured home rules and where you can or cannot exclude them from. So we just wanna make sure we touch, base with them on how we do that exactly.
Related to that, maybe, what is the intent of managing the width to 20 feet? Give me again, give me a history lesson on why that's important or where we're trying to.
So cities oftentimes put a minimum width on the principal structure portion to try to minimize, and this is not the nicest term, but the snout house appearance where you've got just all garage on the front and there's no principal structure. So, you know, oftentimes, especially houses, I would say in the 80s about, they had a very prominent garage and then they had only the width for the front entry essentially, and it was, you know, 10 feet wide or 8 feet wide. So it was basically all garage. So cities started to say, you have to have some principal structure frontage facing there so that we don't end up with just all garages. So in this code, if you recall, in the base zoning districts, we put the standard in that in new structures, the garage has to be set back from the principal structure plane. I think, what, 5 feet? Is that
I think it was 5 feet, yeah.
So we're already accomplishing that to a certain degree, but the idea is what's the right width for that principal structure to make sure you're creating the street environment that you want? Or does it not matter to you? Is it okay if there's no minimum standard for the principal part, if you will? So that's why that sort of width comes into play.
Can I just, will say, I run into a lot of municipalities that take this on by percentage. So structure, you're only allowed a maximum of 50% garage. Oh, the principal structure has to make up 50% of road mass, which I like that personally because it's not, it tends to fit across the spectrum of multiple widths of lot frontage. So
Yeah.
if you have a bigger lot, it's a better, you build a bigger house, you still only get 50% garage or whatever that is. But I run across the 50% a lot, and I think that's a great way to take this on. I'm just throwing that out there.
Mr. Chair, you know, if we want to go even further back in history, I think there was probably some discrimination going on with some of these numbers inherently. If you think of really inexpensive housing that was, say, shotguns, for instance, 8, 10, 12 feet wide. I think there were a lot of communities that didn't want that in their, with larger, nicer homes. I think, and I'm not being completely historical here, but the notion that there's some zoning standards taking place that prevent certain types of houses to be built in the neighborhood, where they need to look like all the other houses. There's some of that going on, but I think we're in a whole different cycle and era now about width. I mean, you could probably make a lot of different. I did get platted 30-foot lots in Chaska, and you know, with setbacks, and they're very small houses. I don't know if I would do it again, but they proved it, and they got built, and they were modular. They were complete modular construction. So, so anyway, that's another little bit about that. We're dealing with an older code that there are a lot of abstract numbers here that just get perpetuated from year after year, decade after decade.
You know, I think I like Mr. Yeager's point here about maybe that percentage approach. If, you know, I was thinking about it more from the lines that you described, Mike, but not with the garage, and now I can see the value of having some way of describing that, but, you know, if it's too narrow, it looks maybe more like a mobile home rather
Right.
than
Right.
a fixed home, you know, just proportion and add 2 stories to that, and, you know, now you have a very tall, narrow structure.
Right, and remember, in TN1, which is essentially North Brainerd and Northeast Brainerd, one of the standards is if there's a serviceable alley, you've got to serve that unit from that alley. Because we got a lot of houses on Northeast Brainerd that are front-loaded, even though they have an alley. And that was the day I interviewed the recycling collector, and he was like, yeah, well, sometimes I go down the alley, and sometimes I go down the street, and it's all mixed up, you know. And so we're not anticipating garages in North Brainerd in front, or garage access in the front, you know, or Northeast Brainerd.
Well, so the
Except
question,
like Bluff or roads that might have.
So, right, if there's obviously if there's a constraint or a hardship, sure.
And Paul's identified those
Yeah.
already.
Then the question becomes, in those areas, do you wanna have a minimum width for the house?
Yeah.
I think it's, I think it's more a maximum width of garage than minimum width of house. To me, it's a 50% maximum garage.
You'd be okay with a 15-foot wide house?
I personally don't see that as a problem.
As I'm just trying to flesh that out, make you just get that.
Yeah.
I think the real distinction though here, and what I'm thinking we need to work the language a little bit, is if there is an attached garage visible from the public right of way versus if it's a TN1 that's served off an alley, right? Because if it's a TN1 served off an alley, the width of the house doesn't really,
Yeah.
like, right? It doesn't matter, but
exactly.
it matters if the garage is attached.
Road facing, yeah.
So it almost feels like it's too standard, like we need to divide it.
And a corner lot complicates that a little bit also, especially if it's a non-alley fed corner lot, you have that, okay, is it the side of the garage, which side faces?
Right.
You know, you got that mess to deal with also.
Yeah, especially, and typically you're gonna have an A and B street, but sometimes there could be 2 A streets, but, again, it should be a simple site plan configuration thing, you know, it shouldn't get too complicated. And I think the general rule, at least that we've been thinking about, is how do we make the code more flexible, more user-friendly, more business-friendly, less regulatory? You know, like, okay, so I wanna have, there was something about accessory buildings and greenhouses, like, oh, you can have all these accessory buildings, oh, if you want a greenhouse, okay, well, you can do that too. And it's like, where's the magic in a greenhouse, right? Sorry, I went off script there.
I just wanna say, again, kind of shifting gears a little bit of the size, to building material. I know, James, I definitely appreciated the approach of just kind of being a little more general, just saying, I have it on this side too. I have it on the one. Pretty much, that is much more, general, just saying, you know, attached, this is specifically on attached material, you know, should be designed pretty much to what Jennifer said, variety of materials, colors, textures, installation, direction, all that, and then just leaving it at that, being it's more simple simple. As staff, when you come into building, we'll review it to see if you actually have some variation. Versus what our current ordinance does, where it's like percentages.
Yeah.
It's so menial and it's so difficult. We have to sit there and be like measuring everything, and it's messy.
But to that point, just some sort of more generic statement like the building material section you just read, does that give you the guidance you need from a code standpoint? I mean, it's very flexible as opposed to being extremely prescriptive.
And I think that's what we want. I think that's what we've kind of been through this whole thing is be flexible. Let the market figure out what it wants to do, but still have some. I think it's flexible, but still lets us go. No, you're not.
Right.
You've got the same thing across. You have a fourplex here, and it looks like the same
Right.
thing, or a row house. It looks the same thing all the way across. You can tell where one unit ends and one begins.
Yeah, and building wrap isn't a finished exterior material.
So, the only question, if I may ask real quick, the only issue I see is once you begin to put yourself in the realm of subjectivity,
Yep.
it's all against what David thinks versus the guy coming in to try to pull his permit. So, are we okay with that, allowing whoever it is that is fielding these permits to navigate the nuance of subjectivity of what is visual interest?
Or articulation.
Correct, right?
And we're also part of this is that, we're not saying, I can say, well, that house would look a lot better if it was green instead of blue.
Right.
We're not saying that. We're just saying, are you changing it up? Right. And again, with all of this, we're not necessarily talking about administrative sections of the code here, but there are appeals. Someone said like David is being ridiculous.
We want to talk to.
There are processes where people can.
And that was, I guess, the point of my question is, we don't want to put the staff in a tough situation every time, or there's a recurring issue. Is it the code's fault? Is it staff's fault? I mean,
I will say that right now, we have a recurring issue getting, I don't say into fights, but getting into difficult conversations with people because our code is so restrictive.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
So,
Yes.
I was gonna say, you articulated what I was thinking exactly. I mean, this whole thing about subjectivity, it's gonna come up. So, I mean, I like how this is, but that subjectivity thing is gonna come up. So, I mean, the same concern. I guess I just wanted to state that because.
I think we have to be clear in our administrative section about, well, who's making the determination, right? It's be assigned to a zoning administrator or whoever's assigned that role, if you will. And that if someone doesn't like the decision, that they have the right to appeal and go before the planning commission and the city council for a final determination.
That helps.
So, I mean, there's always a way out if they don't care for it. And then that way, I always say, if zoning was black and white, you wouldn't need people who went to school for it, right? So, I mean, the reality is that you have to kind of trust your staff that they're going to interpret and follow your policy direction. But then you have to have a get out of jail free card for them of if someone disagrees with them, then they can appeal it.
The appeals process does help a lot. And just in my notes here, and I'm not suggesting interjecting this, but through a variety of approved materials, what I added to my notes, who decides what materials are approved, and maybe the standards do that. And then just how is articulation defined? That's gonna be the sticking point.
Well, I think we can add a definition of articulation
Okay.
into our definitions of how you're interpreting it. I mean, there's quite a few, it's picking the one we like the best, so to speak, but I mean, there's a lot of different definitions of it, obviously, but figuring out the one that matches best with what you're trying to accomplish.
And
Put
from
that in the
where we
definitions.
have tier 2, under that section of building materials, I don't think it said approved or nothing. It might have said somewhere else.
There's a lot of lists.
But a lot of it actually, we're actually getting rid of a lot of the list of stone, this, and
Right.
we're just getting rid of that and saying,
Right.
what do you wanna put on your building?
Yeah,
And
and I'm
letting
not
actually-
suggesting that we do the
And then
approval
going
list.
from there and actually, what we essentially doing is shifting that burden from the zoning code onto the building code. You know, you wanna do that, that's fine, but if you're gonna do that, you have to install it to the standard of the building code. And again, there's still this again, where the base districts will inform this of some of that design standard as well. Certain things, base districts will, to an extent, inform this based off of, you know, a house having common gable or things like that. You know, there's language in here, especially I think when it came to the lighting and stuff about like architecture around the area.
The other thing that we could do here is, as we create more flexibility, more subjective interpretation, is you could add a set of design guidelines for residential and for commercial. I mean, that's another thing that, you know, you've got that. It's another layer. It's not, again, it's subjective as well. It's not a standard, a zoning standard. But like in the TN1 districts that we've identified right now, we can go out there and go, here's the predominant material, here's predominant roof pitch, here's predominant encroachments, here's where it gets loaded. I mean, that's pretty easy to do. But I don't know if we want to write it into this or not. Maybe we do.
I will say the one thing I do, my biggest thing at this point, what I want to avoid is going out of cities like Baxter and having a architectural review.
100% agree with that. As somebody who pulls permits for a living, I love subjectivity until I'm told no. You know, so it's a great thing. It allows, you know, it allows the creativity to go. It allows developers to just keep progressing. You know, the only issue that does come up is that subject.
And honestly, from the cities that I see that do a lot of the architecture where it works, it's cities that hold a lot of, I don't want to say have a lot of power, but as in, you know, it's cities like Minneapolis where people, I want to build an apartment building here, so the city of Minneapolis holds that key of, okay, then you're gonna do what we wanna do. Baxter, Brainerd, we don't have that. You know, we don't wanna be driving people away by, oh, you wanna do that, then here's a list of things we're gonna tell you what to do. They're just gonna go to Baxter.
I would suggest under building materials, under single-family detached, that we add something to that paragraph about installation direction or other characteristics that create articulation either between units or floors that is in character and context with its district or setting. Something to tie it back to where it's coming from. Again, it's somewhat subjective, but it also pins it down to, you know, North Brainerd or Northeast Brainerd or downtown.
Again, it further keeps a house that belongs in Northtown from being built in Northeast Brainerd.
Mr. Chair? I like that, and when you say with its characters, that as described by the zoning standards, or,
Yeah.
because that could work against us, well,
Sure.
my neighbor's got,
Right,
but you're referring back to just like you did with the initial
the character districts, yeah.
character.
Yep, and then it also, part of this too, as I see it, is actually empowers the applicant. If someone said, you know, if they say, they put something in, I'm like, I don't think that matches, they can go out and be like, these are the 4 houses surrounding it and what they look like, and we'd be like, oh, if that's what they look like, then that's the predominant area, you know, look of the area.
Yeah.
We got the direction we need on this section.
No, I have one thing I want to talk about, sorry. The detached garage, the minimum one space enclosed garage, I cannot wrap my head around why we would make people do this. So if somebody could enlighten me on where this came from, why we would have that.
And that's in your current code.
I know it is, but I'm saying the historical reason that we have that or would still want it, because I don't want it personally.
I don't know why you have it, but I will tell you that I'm working in another community that has similar challenges with rental in particular of duplex. It's Lauderdale. You probably have never, I don't know if you guys know where Lauderdale is, but it's tiny, they have a similar lot pattern, and they also attract a lot of renters. And they've found that they've got some tear downs going on in their community because land prices are pretty cheap, they're very close to St. Paul and Minneapolis. And that the number one thing that people, developers or builders wanna do is ditch the garage. And that, because it's a cost thing, and they can develop it a lot cheaper if they don't have an enclosed garage space. Now, I don't know if that is true or not, or it's just anecdotally what they've told me. So I don't know why it's in yours, I'm just telling you, they've decided, we gotta keep, I'm doing their zoning code update right now too, and they're like, we gotta keep it. It's like the only thing that keeps the low, junky stuff out, because they wanna do like a carport, or they wanna do nothing at all and do like a concrete parking pad on the back, or whatever it is. And it's that extra investment that they don't wanna do.
I kind of, personally, I look at it as, first of all, let the market decide. If a garage is, you know, yeah, a garage adds value. If they don't want to add that value, I guess that's up to them. And the second thing would be, I guess I would be fine with ditching the garage requirement as long as we still have a clear off-street parking requirement. My only concern would be to have people who ditch the garage
And don't build in.
and then they don't build a parking pad or a driveway.
Or a carport, I mean, cause there's communities, there's a lot of areas where we build beautiful houses with just a portico or portico chair or just a carport, right?
Yeah, I saw a couple.
That's where I'm going with this, is
Yeah.
we may have a developer who wants to come in and build a beautiful house, doesn't really want an attached garage or even a garage in the dwelling, I can see that, I work for people like this. And we would tell them, you gotta build this little box on the side, it has to be there, I don't know, I just want a good reason for it to be there, that's all. That's my point.
And I would agree. Part of the history, I think, might be told a little bit in the option here for dwellings without basements. You gotta increase the size of the garage. So in other words, our behavior is to stuff our junk in the garage, and we park outside in the snow and scrape the ice and snow off our car, right?
That's
We
what I
fill
do.
we fill
Why are you looking at me?
I can see it from, no.
That is what I see in my neighborhood. Most people don't park in their garage. It's
So I
just
mean,
cramped.
that's part of it, and so,
That's my
so that stuff could end up in the yards without a garage is the bottom line, or stacked under the dry spot of the portico.
That's why you do what Kevin does and buy a building in our future ME district.
There you go. Just store stuff in.
Mr. Chair, that's a good, but that's a good little side discussion here is a good one, because our accessory building standards too restrictive as well? I mean, if everybody's not parking in their garage and storing all their treasures in it, then can they not afford a accessory unit, or the standards are too much, or you don't get to build a big enough one, or what, is there a correlation there? I don't know.
I think we're talking at this point of new,
Right.
so I'm not, what we're seeing right now, I think the market's gonna build a garage.
I think in general it will, and the market wants.
We're not saying you can't, we're just saying you don't have to.
But you do have.
We are saying you have to. We
No,
are
right
saying-
now,
yeah, we are.
what I'm saying is if we change it, it's just
Yeah.
saying,
This discussion.
yeah.
Yeah.
But we wanna maintain an off-street parking standard.
Right.
I guess my question at this point would be, does anyone have a concern of getting rid of the requirement?
Where does all this stuff go if they don't have a garage to put it in?
Well, we have a standard for that also, we have a standard for clutter, and we have an
Yeah.
ordinance for that kind of thing, so I don't think
You get a letter-
you don't
you
alter
get letters from
behavior
my
by
staff,
building
yeah.
standard, I just think that's a wrong-headed approach.
I think in this room there might not be concerns, but up there might be. The clutter, as you said, there's a provision for that elsewhere,
So-
but
And I also
Just-
wanna,
just
yeah,
saying.
and I just wanna also, just throw out there too, even if you get rid of the requirement, again, we're talking new. So yes, you might see some infill that doesn't build a garage, although we're gonna be on tiny lots anyway, and some of those don't have garages anyway. We see that throughout our city, lots that don't have garages already. And then in future developments, those are gonna be done through a PUD, where if a developer is proposing not to have the garage, planning commission councils can say, pause.
Yeah.
We actually, in this situation, do want you to have a garage, and you can have that negotiation through that development process.
It's also a conversation for the tiny house thing, because you could say, oh, you can build a 500 square foot tiny house, but you gotta have a one-car attached garage to it.
Right, of equal
It's
size.
bigger than that.
So it seems totally counter to that mindset, that minimalistic mindset.
And to be clear, this did just say enclosed, did not necessarily mean it had to be attached.
Well, okay,
It
yeah,
has to
I'm,
be present, yes.
It's
but
a
we just had the conversation about small lots, little tiny house, a small house village. Here's a 500 square foot small house and a 900 square foot single car garage behind it, seems
Behind it,
counter to
yeah.
the,
Well, but
Or a
you
little
could,
tiny smart car.
yeah, or whatever, yeah.
you could, I was gonna say, you could have a tiny little garage. Where I'm going tomorrow, they have little Amish houses, and then they have these tiny little enclosures for their, I'm not kidding, it's
With buggies, yeah.
The one thing,
fascinating.
the one thing I would like to say in the garage is if we get rid, I'm all comfortable with getting rid of the requirement
Alright.
of having one. However, I do like the change in this, that gets rid of, if you have a small house, you're limited to how big of a garage you can have.
I agree.
Plus, yeah. So, I like that, get rid of the requirement for garage, but not be a, that goes back to that.
The
base-
50% thing.
The base
Yeah.
zoning district then determines your size of your garage. I don't think the size of your house, it kinda determines it.
The height
but
of it does.
The height of it does, but
Because you don't.
if I have a 500 square foot house, why can't I have a 12 by 24 garage? It goes back to the idea of we don't want your garage, tiny house and huge garage.
Well, that's where that 50% thing, I think, helps.
Yes, other things that control that, by just saying you can't have bigger than 16 by 20.
Right. I've said enough. I've slowed this meeting down way too much already.
Yeah, because,
Stay in the night.
no, I
My
can't.
first house was 18 by 20.
Before,
This still seems lavish.
before we leave Division One, I wanna say,
There's still 2 more slides.
oh, there is, oh, okay,
Yeah,
good.
that was my-
Well, I was going, okay, I thought you were going to Division Two, go ahead.
That's quicker.
Yeah, I think we've got the same kind of conversation with the multifamily stuff.
Yep.
The commercial standards, industrial height, there were no significant changes because it, again, ties back to the base zoning district. The mechanical equipment screening, we actually consolidated into one section as opposed to having it in 2 separate. So this addresses both ground and roof mounted in one place. So, I don't have anything specific, there weren't a ton of changes in these sections except for to kind of parrot the same language, with respect to the,
You can have mine with my
materials.
notes. I'll share with Jennifer. I think I remember my notes. Cover this line here.
yeah, do you have anything
Um,
specifically on those? We did reduce, I will say, it, the minimum square footages on the multifamily stuff slightly. I brought it down based on what I'm seeing from an industry trend perspective, but, I mean, we could certainly come down even further if you wanted, but that's kind of, unless you're doing micro units, I've seen the efficiency units around that 400 square foot mark.
I think that's fine. They still have to meet building code of minimum livable spaces, so. I think that's fine. Did this line have roofs on it, or was that, did any slide have roof on it?
No, because it's embedded in the materials. We just said metal roofs are permitted.
Which
What do
is
you
a
think
slight
about that?
change from what we have now, because right now ours says standing seam. James and I are fully in favor of just saying metal roofs, because we get kickback on the standing seam all the time, and all we can say is, it's what the code says.
Looks better, but it's super expensive.
Yeah, it looks better, and do we really care that a roof is not, do we truly care if it's not staying?
The idea was the pole barnitis, that's the impetus of the writing.
But metal's back.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Metal's,
Totally agree.
and it's a cost-effective material.
And there's metal shingles out there
Yep.
that technically would not fit your, the
Yep.
stainless,
Yeah,
standing seam.
shingles and panels, yeah.
Yep, correct.
So this is, again, relax it a little bit.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So there were no changes to the high water elevation section, none to the groundwater elevation section. The accessory buildings, uses and equipment, again, we tried to reference it back to the basic zoning districts in all cases for consistency.
We had two things in this one, James, I did, one, the groundwater elevation. Historically, we don't really do it now, and historically hasn't, the planning department been touching that, that's been the building official.
Yeah.
So do we need it in there, is the question, or do we just, I don't know, what's your opinion on that, kind of the building official has taken that based off of what the building code requires for cross footings and such?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I would take it out in that case. Most codes I've seen, it's not in there. I don't know about you, Mike, but it just references the building code, so then if they change it, you don't have to change it
And
here.
then I think the other thing we had, I think it was accessory buildings, James and Kevin, you got my notes here, is just double checking that when anything that's in this section does match the districts.
Yep.
Because what was it we caught?
I think it was commercial was still.
Oh, under commercial, the accessory structures for commercial was still saying 30% floor area, when I think in the districts, we had just said like 500 square feet.
Okay,
500
Or 1,000
yeah.
or something, we had put a number in the district,
yes, we
and
did.
it still
right.
said a percentage here, so just making sure, just double checking to make sure
Good
they
catch.
match up.
Yep, I'll comment on that.
That's what we yelled.
So, David, to your suggestion of just striking high water elevation reference because it would be in building code, is that standard, does that standard cross over to the floodplain shoreline? Is it the same, or do we need to ground truth that?
So your floodplain ordinance requires it in there, so you have to keep it in that section of your ordinance of the base floor elevation, so it will still stay in there. And then the building official, if it's in the floodplain, is required to check it if it's within that floodplain overlay. But you can't, from what I understand, you can't remove it from your floodplain ordinance.
So it's gotta be in the floodplain, it just would just be.
Not to say to remove it from this floodplain of the shoreline, but is the standard in the building code the same as what's in the floodplain in the shoreline?
It's the,
So if you remove this reference here, at least if I'm looking at 4-1-6 of our markup, it's anchoring high water elevation to the floodplain. Am I looking at a different spot? Are we in the same place here on the?
no, you're okay. So it references that, but it's a repeat of what's in your floodplain ordinance,
Okay.
I guess is what I'm saying. So it remains in your floodplain ordinance. The building code also has a standard in it. There, because it's an overlay, because the floodplain is an overlay to all. So there's a standard that's in the building code for any property, then there's the floodplain standard, that's the overlay if you're in the floodplain.
Or that'd be shoreland district or any of that.
Or the
kind of-
shoreline.
Or the DNR.
Correct.
So, and we're not recommending changing that, we're just saying in.
It's redundant.
General
It's redundant.
properties,
So
let
you're,
the building code just take care of it.
so you would just chuck 4-1-6 and 4-1-7 because they're already covered in the shoreline and floodplain, or
Yep.
building
Yep.
code.
Yep.
Okay, I'm with you.
Kind of get rid of repetitiveness when
Yep.
necessary.
Okay.
Anything on accessory buildings?
James, do we have anything other than just making sure it's tied back?
We mentioned matching 200 square feet up.
Oh, yes, so one of the other things that James and I were talking about is our code right now. So the building code says anything that's over 200 square feet has to have a building permit. However, our zoning code says anything over 120 square feet has to be homogeneous in design. So what James and I were thinking is, would it just be easier just to say they're the same standard?
Yeah.
You don't have to be homogeneous until you're 100, until you're 200.
You have a building permit.
Because otherwise, you know, right now it's, they don't need a building permit for anything under 200, so most of the time we don't know that it's going in.
Yeah.
So how do we determine if it's homogeneous in design, and then we have to do it after the fact, and it just gets ugly with someone, well, I bought a, that is paid $2,500 for this shed, and they're telling me I can't, you know. So have those two things be the same.
I like that, that's good. How many of those plastic Menards buildings can I buy and put in my backyard?
And how far do they have to be separated
That's
from,
determined.
considered a separate structure?
Right, how many can I have?
By the big zoning district.
Oh, okay. That's sort of a trick
As
question.
many as you
Yeah,
want.
as many as you want, as long as it's
to
got metal roof.
Also, yes, and we just also, I think, wanted to call out there too, we wanted to keep with the plastic canvas or vinyl tarps shall be used.
Yeah, it's easy to
You know,
use those.
again, we don't want that hoop house temporary structure thing.
So you have kind of an open question here, do we need to add any other materials?
As excluded.
What
Oh, one of the other questions I had in there,
What page was that?
13
on design standards for accessory structures. So we've kind of said metal roofs are allowed everywhere else. So can we just, where it says metal roofs are allowed provided they're constructed, I think we need to change that on accessory structures.
Oh, good catch, yeah.
So it's just, it's uniform for primary and accessory. Metal roofs are allowed. Commissioner, anything?
So on those commercial materials or industrial buildings shall be constructed of,
Oh, thank you. There's another one. So in
You want me
there.
to start reading you your notes? I'll do my best.
Yeah. So we did
Is
have
that
a
what he
question
wrote
on
in his
that.
notes?
So
I'll do my
this-
best.
So in there, you kind of had under commercial, under industrial districts, you had like all these plastic materials.
Yeah.
I don't know where those came, like, from, in our code currently, those are only listed for greenhouses, not, they're only listed for greenhouses. I don't know,
The hoop building?
like if you wanna have
Oh.
Teflon, silicone, you know, those are the allowed coverings for a greenhouse. But we don't want them for an accessory structure. Like an industrial zone, we still want the accessory structure to somewhat match the primary structure.
We basically just need to fix this.
in this language, it says that those are acceptable materials.
Right.
Yeah, we don't want that.
Right.
We don't
So you-
want someone to,
So you
again,
want-
for a
you
green,
wanna-
it's acceptable for a greenhouse, it's
Right.
not acceptable for just any
An
accessory.
industrial accessory building.
So they're just gonna.
So you're saying these are not allowed, is where you wanna go with this, cause that's not what it says.
Yeah, it would just be same with the other.
Yeah, it's to match the principal structure or with any of the following fabric material.
And we don't want that.
Okay.
We only want this to be okay if you have a greenhouse.
No, I get that. And we're eliminating greenhouses.
This is blue.
Well,
just kidding.
I think we're not eliminating.
I'm just
we
kidding,
didn't
kidding.
spell them out.
Yeah, it's very this is the most specific thing in the code right there, those
Mhm.
tetrafluoroethylene.
Okay, don't breathe it. I think there was something that Jacques Cousteau used to breathe when he was doing some of those deep dives.
Do I have any other notes, Kevin?
Are we to swimming pools yet?
Nope.
We're getting there though.
I'm kidding. Yeah, you have one here that says, does Thort Modal District recommend?
I agree.
I think we got it.
Okay.
It's not easy being staff.
No.
So, did somebody say swimming pools? Can we get to that? Is that next?
It is nice.
I just bypassed it.
I know you did, but it's okay.
I'm petitioning for an ordinance change in Crow Wing County, by the way, this,
So swimming pools, we had a little bit of a discussion about swimming pools. I hate our swimming pool ordinance. I think it's ridiculous that if you wanna have a kiddie pool in your yard, you have to have a fence. So pretty much what we said is, we pretty much changed it to say, if you're 24 inches deep or 5,000 gallons, it's a building permit. If it's, but we aren't requiring the fence. Kind of determine, like, you know, and we think that there's a reason, something probably happened at some point. And the city said we should require fences, but.
Where it gets really
In our opinion, it's really, that is you as a private property owner, is your decision on whether or not you wanna fence it and you wanna take that risk. That being said, commercial pools within a development that would have many people going to, those to be fenced. But-
it gets really funny where you have shoreline. So I own 100 feet of Mississippi River. I had to put a fence around my pool, even though I have a river right there. It didn't have to be fenced.
Kids only wanna drown in the pool.
And besides, I think insurance companies have covered the fencing around pools.
And
Yeah, good point.
And ultimately too, honestly, what this ends up happening, what ends up happening is, you get someone who calls with a pool, or we get a pool, they don't have they wanna put a pool, need a fence, so then they don't like that, and then they see a neighbor who put up a pool, and then they snitch on their neighbor,
Yeah.
that my neighbor has a fence, he doesn't have a pool, or has a pool who doesn't have a fence, and then it's just.
Well, the other part I suggested too is, okay, you've got an application for a pool, take it out of take the standards out of the code, put it in your application, because if that changes, you just change the application, not the zoning code, number one. Number two, to Kevin's point, if it's less than 24 inches or 5,000 gallons, maybe we just simply say proof of property owner insurance.
You don't even wanna be responsible for that as a city.
No, but it's like, I have to prove insurance and so many other things, and it's not,
I just don't know if.
Doesn't
unless
indemnify
there's-
anybody.
Unless there's, Jennifer, you can tell me case law out there, you know, if someone wants to put up a temporary pool in their backyard, should they do, as a city, the only note I made is I think we should make it then meet accessory structure setback.
Yeah, it's an accessory structure.
You know, can't be in the front yard, needs to be in the backyard, accessory structure setback. But other than that, I don't really think the city needs to be involved in you putting up your temporary pool for the summer. If you're putting an in-ground pool, that's different,
That's a
building-
structure.
That's a
Yeah.
structure, there's building permits, all that,
and apartment buildings do that.
yeah. But if I just wanna get one of the, you know, pay $1,000 and go get a plastic pool from Menards or one of the pool companies, you know, put that in my backyard for 2 months out of the year, I don't think the city needs to be involved in that.
You just gotta reseed underneath it in the spring, right? All that dead grass.
I got swimming pools.
Is a neighborhood hockey rink an accessory structure?
I think we have plenty, do we have enough neighborhood hockey rinks, Kevin?
No, I'm not city rinks, I'm talking on private property,
Backyard, whatever.
backyards.
I don't know if I've never heard, I've heard of them, I've never seen them in city limits. That's what I'm saying, I think we have enough neighborhood hockey rinks to cover.
I've seen one.
We have,
In
we
city
have them
limits.
in St. Paul, like on small lots.
They're a huge
So-
deal too, the lighting's an
Some of
issue,
them,
it's a
yeah,
big, it's
in our
like,
neighborhood, they have lights,
turned into a huge fight down there.
flags, all
Yeah.
that stuff.
Sound,
Figured it out.
My department hasn't heard any issues about backyard hockey rinks, let's put it that way.
we have great public rinks in our Brainerd Park. There you go.
Okay, so are we officially
Yep,
done with
done there.
Division 1?
Yep.
Okay.
mostly pulled straight out from our current ordinance, isn't it?
Yep, there's just, the majority of this, the changes in this section, I think are really about clarification. It wasn't really anything changing meaning for the most part. The purpose and intent, there were no significant changes. The minimum lot area requirements were modified to match the base zoning district, and were also amended to kind of address the buildable area. The intent of it initially really is about supporting a septic system. That's why you have to have a certain amount of contiguous area. And so clarifying that a bit and making that distinction.
I had a question on that. In the base zoning, didn't we change it to 0.75?
After I sent it to you, I remembered that,
Okay.
yes. So,
It's only
and
right
it,
there.
and it really has to, the main thing is complying with Minnesota Rule 7080.
Yep.
So,
And
but that,
7080 basically requires the alternate site be part of that
yes, yeah,
footprint, buildable area.
correct. You have to
And-
have a primary and a secondary, and it has to be contiguous.
And at the end of the day, Crow Wing County does all our septic, so. Very good.
So this was really about cleaning that language up. There wasn't really a meaning change or a policy change. Section 4-2-3, there were very minimal changes. 4-2-4 yards. The main change here proposed is actually the green space distinction, which is really kind of had a couple ways of describing green space, but really what we're talking about is that you have an impervious surface coverage calculation. It gives you a number. Whatever is not covered is your green space or your open. So instead of trying to create these magical other percentages, we're just tying it back to the impervious surface. And then saying, okay, so then that's your green space. Now what can you do in that? In this actually, I think it's in the landscape standard, we actually talk about then that the green space can be and have your stormwater management. It can have, your, why am I drawing a blank? You know, the native plants that control water. Rain gardens. I was like, why is that escaping me right now? So the idea that those things can be part of your green space network. But here it's clarifying it to make sure that we've got a consistent definition and tying it back to the base zoning district again. The setbacks, there is one standard in here, the front setback exceptions, that again feel like they're a little bit in opposition to some of what is in the base zoning district.
I had a note about that, the no less than 20 feet, that completely goes against TN2.
Right, so, but there's also just some funniness in here in general if we think about what our objectives of the base zoning districts are. So I think it's worth thinking through how that gets drafted, but to me it felt, it's there, but it felt like it was in conflict with a lot of the discussions that we've had about what we're trying to promote via the new zoning districts, especially in like the TN1, TN2 districts in particular. The traffic visibility setback, we're proposing to remove a lot of that language and actually put it right into the base zoning district as part of those, the table information. And then the permitted yard encroachments, which is 4-2-6, is really, again, not changed significantly, but then making the accessory uses or equipment, removing the stuff about the accessory buildings themselves, because we've already talked about how those need to be positioned or sited on a lot. So really this is about the equipment or the uses and really cleaning that up about, because we're talking about encroachment, so air conditioners, antennas, sport courts, swimming pools, those types of things, as opposed to the buildings themselves. And then finally, fences and referencing the fences back to the code section.
Two things, Mr. Chair. Corner lots, double frontage lots. Lots which abut more than one street shall provide the required front yards along every street. 4-2-5C.
Sounds right.
Our only thought on that is, James and I had some discussion about this, just recent things we've been dealing with literally in the last year, is are we, by requiring a house to be on essentially the same setback on both sides, are we kind of in a way punishing someone for having a corner lot and then inadvertently shoving a house to the extreme one side of a lot instead of like centering it? So, our comment was, you know, should it be maybe, instead of, we don't believe that a house should be able to be, you know, if it's a corner lot and it's a TN1, so it's a 5-yard setback, we don't think it should be 5 feet from that corner where there's a street, but maybe it should just be simple to say it's double the side yard setback. Because a front yard on this, you know, say it's 20 feet here and 20 feet here, again, now you're shoving it to really one side of the, but closer to the neighbor, versus if you said it's 20 feet for the front yard and it's on the street side on the side yard, it's a double.
Well, does the homeowner get to pick which one they would meet then? So just using a grid style pattern neighborhood, how do you determine which one is the primary front yard?
Orientation of the house. And.
Of the block.
And the block. So if every house faces one side, you're also gonna face that one as well.
I see.
It'd normally be that, the shorter end would be, okay, that, you know. if you-
And another historical piece here is typical on corner lots, you might want, a lot of times, cities or homeowners would want to emphasize that. So that's where you see wraparound porches, so you get an equal amount of setback, and you've got this big wraparound porch. When we don't do that all the time. And that would deal with that encroachment, but it sets up the distinction of a corner lot. You know, you got the bigger house, the bigger whatever. But I don't know if I think we pick the block orientation of the street, and that's what your setback is based on.
So we also, in our discussions about ADUs, favored those on corner lots, but it sounds like we're eating those up with setbacks.
Well, we said by right, you can do an ADU
Right.
corner, yeah.
But you wouldn't.
And right now too, if you look, well, I have to double check our base zoning. Our current zoning code reads is that it has a, you know, it's 3 feet for a regular setback for an accessory structure, but if it's on a corner, I think it's then 15, isn't it, James? I believe so, yeah. For an R1, it's then 15. Now you've got the house setback 20, but the accessory structure only back 15. Why don't you just make them even? Or at least have the house closer than the accessory structure on that one side. So that was just our thought, you know, still requiring it to be pushed a little further back, but maybe not an equal, maybe just saying it's double the, and that's a minimum, double the side yard setback. So that'd be, in a TN1, that'd be 10 feet.
Yeah, and we probably need to address that in the base district on accessory dwelling units as well.
Yeah, I kind of feel like this actually comes out and we add a standard into the base zoning
Yeah.
district for each of them, so it's clear. And then you're not, this doesn't get buried in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the base, so side yard setback, and then kind of what our current one is, and then corner,
Right, right.
10.
Yeah.
So that, you know, and I agree with staff thoughts on that, David. So then I'm thinking about how does that affect the front yard setback exception with the dentition? You're trying to avoid that dentition effect between houses as you go from one to the next in the neighboring one. So number B under 4-2-5. So now already I'm now gonna have the corner lot on the secondary street, the side of the house on the secondary street now will be closer, right? And then the adjoining house will now be facing the secondary street and will have to pull back, right?
That's why I don't like it personally.
Yeah. So now it's gonna get a little bit complicated in that regard to these two standards that are sitting next to each other. We're now allowing
I get what you're saying.
a buck tooth.
I understand that, yeah, I don't know that I necessarily think of it in that manner. this is out here, this house is back here versus it being even on all sides. So from that perspective, I can understand the double. Again, I think from what we.
They could always ask for a variance, I mean,
The variance, yeah.
I think we should,
Terrain would be one, right?
terrain or lot size as a hardship. If they just happened to have a really small corner lot, or the impervious was screwing them up somehow, or whatever. But I would rather manage that side of it than just let everyone. That's my thought.
And then in that perspective, again, thinking about that, then I'm actually, I'll go back on what I said. Now, I do think we should though, still remove it from here and put it in the base zoning district. So on a corner, it's equal to front yard setback. However you wanna say that, 20 feet. 20
yeah,
feet. Just put it in the base instead of here.
yeah, I think it gets lost here.
There are examples in both North and South Brainerd that I can think of where the main interest of the house is not what would normally be the what we would call the front of the house. They're on the side, right? Or a wraparound porch is another example of that also.
Yep. I had nothing else, in either of these.
Toughen it out.
Go.
Yeah, we can go to the next one, unless somebody has one.
Anything else on Division 2, guys, lot and yards? Lot and yard provisions, otherwise known as standards or requirements. Okay, outdoor lighting. I don't know if we've changed a lot here, have we, at all?
No, because I was scared.
I know, I was too.
I think pretty much what you did is you changed districts to correlate with their new district, as
Yep.
close as they can. There's one comment I think we do need that I found in here, and Mike and Jennifer would not have known this. But under every section when we talk about the maximum light height, and then we give that performance standard of it can increase by 5 feet.
Yep.
We had discussed this at a previous planning commission meeting last year, when we brought this back up, is cleaning up that language. Because again, we had a discussion of, we won't change it now because we're gonna change it there, but this is essentially what we wanted. And from what Jennifer, looking back at my notes, what really, because this language is gonna get kinda clunky, is what we're trying to get at is, I think we kinda call it a tiering, where we want the taller light in like the center of the lot. And then as you get closer to the property line, it gets shorter. So if you want a 25-foot light, it needs to be in the center of the lot. And then if you want a light on the property line, then it needs to be like 13 feet tall. So it kind of does that make sense? Does the commission still agree with that? Okay, I just want to make sure that was.
And the example, and I think when we presented this ordinance to city council, it kind of naturally falls into the either-or category as opposed to the mixed strategies of the respectful lighting around the perimeter and the higher lighting in the center to get you to light where you want it. A good example of this, if you want to just visually see it, is St. Joseph's Hospital here in town. They've got the low lighting around, the tall stuff doesn't meet the cutoff, but it gives you the concept of low, respectful lighting on the edges, lights the sidewalks and so forth.
It's neighborhood scale, yeah.
And the higher stuff does the fill. You got a couple of poles to do the fill with, rather than multiple ones to have to manage and navigate around.
Is that your best standard, you think?
It's almost impossible to write. I mean, everyone knows
Best
the idea, right? The
Yeah,
idea
best
here is we're
example.
gonna try to control spillage both out and up. How do
Yeah.
you write that? I mean.
No, I know, but I'm saying is that seems to be a good example to work from.
And we feel like, and then we kind of discussed too, I feel like when we get to again, trying to make this code have as many images and stuff in it, I feel like.
This is a good
From
drawing.
image,
Yeah.
you could easily say, your 20-foot light goes here, your 13-foot lights go here. You could put a 13-foot light in the middle if you wanted to, you just can't put a 24.
25. I just
light in
diagram
that
it.
side,
Yeah,
so.
if you would look at Ivy, and the lighting between the hospital parking lot and the houses,
Yeah,
you
that's
get a
exactly
good feel about the lighting in managing the trespass, and it
Yep.
does a fairly good job, but the high stuff splashes onto the second floor,
Sure.
which you might think about as the bedrooms, right?
Yeah.
First floor, and that's the 13-foot is saying, all right, I'm gonna allow some spillage out of there that might impact first floor. But the second floor, you're protecting with the cutoff lights.
But you were saying Ivy?
Ivy and Fourth,
Okay.
North Fourth.
Go there at night, maybe tonight in the rain,
Let's do it.
on your way over to Holiday.
You mean snow by the time we're, yeah.
No, I just
No,
checked,
it's
we're
not gonna
okay.
be snowing when the time we get out now.
It says rain through 11, I already looked, and we're not staying till 11.
Okay.
Well,
Promises.
Other than that, I think the lighting ordinance is as it was, and I don't think there's any big desire to change it.
Is there are you aware of a better measure of light trespass than the foot candle stuff? That's a tough one, and I'm dying for something that's easy for everyone to be able to get their head around, that staff could easily measure consistently. And the light trespass standard basically has you engaging with the individual source owner, basically, to have them flick their light on and off while you sit there with a calibrated device. And that's what it is, and that's the world of reality it is.
It's lumen, color, or candle power, really.
Yeah.
That's it.
I can't, I mean, I guess we can look, I haven't dug into that very, very deeply, but
Do
we
you have
can
many,
look
do you work
around.
for many cities that actively go out there and measure it, other than like, when we need a photo, when they submit the photometric plan, it says it, but do they actually ever go out there with the actual meter?
Maybe complaint driven.
Yeah.
And that's,
I'm just saying right now, I don't even have the meter, so.
Good to know.
Well,
yeah, that's.
The cities that I work in, of which there's multiple, no, we don't have a light meter, and we check the photometric plan when it comes in and require that as part of the development. I do know a couple of cities where we have standards that are similar to this, basically that say, at the property line or within 10 feet of the property line, your fixture is limited to X height. For every 5 feet from the property, or every 10 feet from the property line, you can increase by a certain pole height. To try to, then if they install stuff, that's not good later. But I mean, I literally, and I've been in a lot of cities, nobody stands out there and.
That falls apart with topography also. So
Yeah.
if that parcel is,
The only time honestly, the only time it's really become an issue is when we have two neighbors who are feuding and decide that they're going, the next thing they're gonna complain about is their neighbor's light on the side of their house.
Yeah.
Kenny Rogers chicken. That's what it is.
To which we have just fallen into the habit of
Seinfeld.
sending a letter to the neighbor, like going out there and trying to see, but it's like, again, I'm not gonna stand at your neighbor's house with a light meter. Hey neighbor, maybe don't have a floodlight pointing right into your neighbor's bedroom.
In that situation, then you're gonna be able to use this to,
Which we have done before, we have done, there are those that we go out there and we're
With
like,
his phone, I
I
can
don't
see him
even,
now.
I don't even,
Yeah.
I don't even need, there's the times we've had it where it's like, I don't need a meter to
Right,
tell me
right.
that you are over a foot candle over your neighbor's house, like, you have a floodlight pointing directly at your neighbor's house.
and if it comes to that.
That's 10
and then
feet
to
away.
Topography, then
Yeah.
we'll get the tool.
Yeah.
Is there appetite here at the commission for introducing a color standard,
I was gonna ask. Yeah.
Kelvin standard here to say 3,000 or less, we're cool.
Kevin,
More
what's the
than
park board
3,000.
put in your sign standard?
We're at 3,000, with a
3,000.
preferred at 2,700. You're really limited on fixtures when you get down to 2,700, but you can buy almost everything you want in a 3,000.
Yeah, if you
What
were,
we try to avoid is a 5,000,
Right.
which is the blue, gigantic, bright car lot style lighting on a park building.
which are ones that end up going on to the sides of buildings as well. So, maybe just a quick read, head nods as to whether folks are comfortable maybe exploring a color standard.
I'd love to.
Exploring, yeah, I don't know the pros and cons versus foot candle versus lumen, so. If somebody can-
You could do both.
How many cities do this? How many cities have a, look at the color of the light?
Wow.
A lot? Okay.
Especially in residential districts and park spaces, green
Okay.
spaces, common spaces. I run into a lot.
Is this separate in addition to this? Or is it replacing this foot
I
candle?
would say it's an addition.
Oh,
No,
foot
it's
candle
separate.
power,
Color
color,
is
Kelvin
different.
is color, so
Okay.
orange light versus blue
You
light.
would
Okay.
still have the
Then my-
trespass measure of foot candles, but is it time to talk about managing colors so that you
Sure.
keep the warmer colors?
No, you're shaking your head no.
Do what you want, do what you keep talking.
I wanna know why you're shaking your head.
Because I'm putting myself in position of being staff. Of I mean, having that conversation.
Easy with the development,
It is,
it's hard when someone changes a light bulb.
right.
Because it's cheaper or lasts longer.
Well, and then it's just,
Or everything else was out of stock at the hardware store.
But again, and lighting is just one of those again,
It's just
where
common these days.
it's easy in a new development for me to look at your photometric plan and say, yes, it's good, yes, it's not. It's again, when someone changes the light bulb, when someone puts something on the side of their house that doesn't require a permit, it's the enforcement mechanism is difficult. And that's, I don't think there's any way around it, lighting is just difficult.
no, and it's just time consuming because you'll write the letter and then the neighbor's like, yeah, you're gonna forget about me, how long, you know what I mean? And then it's like repeated letters, repeated contacts, it's a lot of resources to maintain it.
How long did it take us to address that one neighbor one? About 4 months, 3 months?
Something like that.
But, okay, we can be, I mean, institutional and commercial lighting, we can be very specific about that to the T. The residential side of the equation, I mean, we're not, it's more of a, you know, he said, she said, or do you have to apply foot candles, not to neighborhoods, right? Not to private lots, is that what the code says?
Mr. Chair, what's the,
Light source shall be controlled so as not to light adjacent property.
What's the
Maximum lit
interest?
levels defined by this ordinance.
for the two of you, what are the reasons you'd want to pursue that?
Number one is that the blue color range is much more visible and affects the night eye quite a bit. So, you know, like bright blue lights on near roadways and things is one of the things that's discouraged, just because it gives you that temporary shutting your eye down. The other is it just stands out in contrast to with the same power, the same number of lumens, a blue light it appears so much more bold. It doesn't necessarily illuminate more. It just
An example is when you drive down the highway, you'll notice a car coming at you that has the newer blue HID or a super hot blue colored headlight. I guess what I say the interest for me is, Ted, is more in the institutional, new construction, commercial aspect of it, downtown urban, where you have spillage into the sky. That's, to me, and new construction is much easier to put your thumb on this
Yeah.
than it is to say the neighbor who's changing his light bulb.
Yeah, so I don't know if we can subdivide that nuance or not, and in sports facilities, that's a whole different.
that's
We-
different
we-
anyway.
Yeah, we did something,
We
we made some
exempt those.
comment about essential services and facilities. Add to that, okay, so,
It, you know,
We can, to the term that I believe Ted you used, we can investigate. Is the word you looked at, research, look into?
The
Yep.
one thing I see a
Look into
lot.
You can look into it.
The one thing I will say in residential that I've seen a lot in some of the cities that I work is instead of controlling the light color or the light spillage, they just say all all light fixtures on the frontage must be hooded and downcast. So then if they get a higher power, at least it's not spilling out. That's also a design standard, of course, but it's another way of controlling in a residential zone as opposed to trying to dictate.
It would help control the neighbor who's screwing with the neighbor with a big old floodlight pointed at their house.
Right, because it has to be hooded, it has to be downcast, and then if they replace it with, what I was just telling Dave, like, my husband would screw with you and get the Philips Hue light, and then turn it blue when you're not there, and then turn it to orange, you know what I mean? So it's like with the changing technology, it's so difficult, so then at least if you're dealing with fixture types that are hooded and decked, it's another way of dealing with it.
Are you open to adding that as a residential standard, hooded and down?
For like if a new development comes in.
I would be comfortable with that for sure.
That would also help us again, if we have those neighbor to neighbor issues, we can just go in there and be like, it needs to be hooded and down.
Perfect.
Everything that's CUP, we'll just blast them with 2700.
Yeah, again, and anytime you have a CUP or that, you can always add
Which
extra.
we did with the school,
You can
if
always
you
add
remember.
extra restrictions.
But also, that was a battle on a lot of those where they, again, the ones that, they're probably the most offensive are the ones that are high on the building, on a very tall building, and they're, right, and those were the ones that were unwilling to be able to change at that point in time in the project. So, having that standard, so if we were to put, are we saying that we would explore putting color into the commercial industrial? Is that what I'm hearing that we would say? And then for the residential, maybe we do a design standard of down.
Hooded and down.
Yeah, so, by communicating that in the commercial and industrial, regardless of CUP, I think it sends the signal that they should be planning their lighting, accordingly when they come in for the CUP, so that's not a discussion anymore.
And that was something I think we heard, right, like, one of the reasons you as a commission took on the lighting ordinance is because you heard from the council was, stop regulating by CUP. So, that's what you did, change the ordinance.
Don, did you have a comment there?
Nothing
Reading
constructive.
body language there.
No, nothing constructive, ideas, but nothing constructive.
About lighting?
Yeah.
Nothing illuminating.
And again, there's always the caveat here, I can do nothing about your streetlights, talk to BPO. Or Paul Sandy.
I got his number.
Okay, it's 8:15. You guys still have an appetite for Division 4?
Yeah.
All right.
My eyes may have been playing tricks on me, but I thought I saw snowflakes.
No, my
James,
saw
do
some
you wanna
warnings.
come up for
I
this?
saw some warnings come up on my phone for 94 South.
So,
My app says it's raining.
so,
I'm going with that.
So I pushed the update.
we will try to power through this.
Yeah,
I will
I'm fine
say
keeping going, but I just wanted to
I
mention.
am, inviting James up here for a reason.
Oh, boy.
No, I'm scared.
Guest speaker.
Is it gonna be midnight?
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't matter to me. I live 2 blocks from here, so
Speak high
I'm
level. We'll
I'm
go
just
at high
kidding.
level.
We
We will
wanna
hit
quit,
this at
we
a high
quit.
level. And then we'll hit this on January 6th.
Oh, good, that sounds fun.
We're gonna hit this at a more high level for you, for the commission. We'll hit it detailed with you and Mike on January 6th.
Sure.
So-
On the street.
Go ahead.
It's a vacuum.
Thank you.
It's a
My
snow
hearing-
siren.
my hearing
It's a
aids
snow-
pick
it's
up
a,
the,
the blizzard warnings are going off. Don't worry about it. I live right there, buddy.
They have those in Fairbanks.
All right, so purpose and intent, no significant changes. Minimum requirements, no significant changes. Landscaping, let's see what I'm seeing through. Really minimal modifications in there, except for moving, this is where that use discussion comes in, moving that to be all together with the general standards as opposed to separating them. That was more of a, I think, flow change than it was anything else, and trying to clean it up for consistency. In that same general landscaping and improvement standards section, we have new tree planting standards identified for, that feels wrong, that might be a typo.
What?
For traditional neighborhoods and,
C and a T and.
yeah, but I put CC up there,
Oh.
that's why I knew that was wrong.
Oh, okay.
I was like, I don't think it was for commercial.
Well,
we
we have some standards for commercial.
We do, but the new ones are
Yeah.
for the contemporary neighborhoods and the traditional neighborhood zoning districts. Before we go beyond this, I feel like David and James have some comments about this section, so.
Okay. So we're gonna do it high level. We've kind of split this off, I think, into the green space and parking lots.
Right.
So we'll attack the green space first. I think the first comment we had was under, regarding the shrubberies.
So first one's kind of, so non-residential uses, we really don't have shrub requirements for commercial properties, like around the building or anything like that, which is pretty standard, and I know in a lot of municipalities that I used to work with, trying to figure out how many shrubs we'd have to place around the foundation of the building. Right now, for a commercial property, we really look at shrub count based on the parking lot screening requirements, and that's about it.
Did the commission want to consider having landscape requirements of actual, like, the building, like we do for residential? Again, talking about multifamily attached, floor shrubs shall be placed per dwelling unit. Do we want to consider that as well for commercial, requiring some
And maybe
landscaping
there'd be
around the
an
building versus-
exemption for like downtown districts or something
Yeah.
like that, but.
Or you just simply don't have dirt next to your building.
Earlier this fall, driving past Costco and Baxter, the variety of shrubberies and the color that they were popping in the fall was aesthetically nice and really looked good, with otherwise this, box store facade. And if that's kind of what you're talking about, it was something that stuck with me when I had to drive past it that particular day. It was like, wow, that looks nice. It's well done. Placement, the height variability, deciduous evergreen.
So yeah, and then on top of the shrubs, adding a tree requirement to commercial properties.
Think about how different 210 corridor would look right now if we had this in place 40 years ago.
And 80 years ago we did. 80 years ago there were trees.
You have photographic proof.
Yep.
Good old dad.
Yeah, it happened.
So essentially, again, this is around the building, we're saying there needs to be some kind of landscaping around the building in addition to parking lots.
Good.
So in this, and the kind of the second part is going back to some of these screens, so not only the parking lot, but screening against residential buildings, or against residential uses. A lot of it has to deal with opacity, and, we have a lot of people come in and they really don't know what that means, so, kind of our idea that we're talking about was almost creating like a table, saying that like, a coniferous shrub has to be planted, 5 feet on center, 8 feet on center, based on if it's a 4-foot or 6-foot screen. Deciduous has to be planted, this much on center, rather than kind of this ambiguous 80% opacity screen.
I can tell you right now what 80% opacity means to me is going to be different from what 80% means to Kevin, to Michael, to Teresa, and to Don.
We've also already identified that subjectivity is okay in some aspects.
But I think it comes down to, and I'll just say, from a staff's perspective, one of the reasons we're approaching this of let's just tell developers what we want. Couple reasons. One, that is what other cities do. They just tell the developer what they want. We want this. Do this. The other issue is we then get we approved it, here's the landscape plan, it's been approved, we believe it's this, and then we get.
I'd say in this instance, we get a whole bunch of people that say, I don't understand, essentially what this means. So it's not them coming with a, intricate plan or, ideas or anything. It's just pretty much you tell us what you want. It's almost us trying to design that for them rather than giving them numbers of what they need.
You would be shocked in how much we went back and forth with Copper Creek for mid-Minnesota, right next door. And now look what it looks like. Like, you have landscape architects and planners coming in, they don't understand what our ordinance is asking for. Because other cities just say, here's what we
This,
want.
yeah.
We want a deciduous planted 5 feet on center. And they've got, and they have this nice table,
Illustration.
illustration and a table of, these are the approved types of vegetation, and this is how it should be planted.
I like it, lay it out.
So my question is whether that level of specificity belongs in the code, or whether it's, and I'm only saying it from a usability of the code perspective, because if you codify it, then every time you wanna change something, you have to amend your zoning code. So what I'm wondering is, and it probably needs more teeth than it has, but what I'm wondering is, do you create instead, this goes back to Mike's comment earlier about, do you do landscaping guidelines
Landscape standard.
that are standards, that then if you decide, actually, that's not really working, you're not codifying, like, bushes that are 4 feet have to be planted at X feet on set, you know what I mean? It's more like, you have to have a certain number of plants per, square foot or lineal foot, or whatever your standard is, you put that in the code, so that everybody knows there's gonna be.
And that's what I've seen for a lot of that.
And then you do a standard set, and you reference landscape standards in your code, then you guys and planning commission and have the ability to change your standards without always having to do public hearings and change your code.
I would say as long as the code has enough teeth, so that when we come back to an applicant and says this doesn't meet code, they can't, our guidelines say this, they can't be like, well, those are just guidelines.
And that, I think, works for like around buildings, so people can come up with, okay, this many shrubs need planted, but they can kind of come up with a design or whatnot. Some of the on-center has to do with the required screening.
No, I know.
Yeah,
For
That's-
vegetation, I wonder,
It's
As
just
a perimeter, like on the
as a
perimeter.
perimeter, yeah.
And that's something, and I'm just gonna jump to that, cause that's been, I know, a piece that the planning commission has discussed with almost every CUP and every parking lot, is that
Something before
screening
I
piece.
got it. I was playing with my hand.
I don't know. And I'm just gonna jump to this, I think, cause it's a big part of it, we discuss parking
I have a
lots.
kid in steering wheel.
Almost every time we have a parking lot, we talk about parking lot screening. And I think the question that we want the planning commission to answer is screening around parking lots to make the parking lot pretty and to lessen the impact of the concrete / asphalt? Or is it about screening headlights? Because there's two different ways. If you want headlights, then we wanna write the ordinance that said it pretty much says, we want a berm, we want a hedge wall. Or if it's about making it pretty, that's a different standard. That goes into more of, these are the general types of things we want, here's how you plant, So it's kind of a which one do you want, because some of the things we have now,
Because right now it calls for, plantings no less than 3, no more than 4 feet.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden we get back, like, plant doesn't, fit into that category when, we get calls from people trying to design something like that. So that's one of the difficulties that we go through, and then again, the opacity level.
If I were to pick which is more offensive, I think it's the vehicle lights. And, and I think we have the standard there where you would have a berm, and on the residential side or the residential use side of that, then you're having plantings along there to soften, or a wall, half wall or whatever, and you've got plantings on the residential side that soften that a bit. So you're softening the barrier that blocks the lights, and not necessarily trying to beautify a flat spot.
now, and I'll say it's, on residential, now you have like, the city hall parking lot. There's no residential on there. Is that the same?
I don't think it is.
Like
I
spilling
think
out.
that is a different, to me. To me, the hospital did it perfect. What they did at the hospital, that was a huge fight when it happened. But the way how the hospital did it, and then when that came up, the conversation was both. It was both aesthetics of hiding the cars, that kind of thing. Some opacity helps with the the vandalism, the likelihood of trouble, or the collection of trash within there, those kinds of things was what was brought up with the opacity. But then also the lighting for plowing the hospital parking lots at 4 in the morning when there's neighbors' houses right there. So I almost think you gotta look at both personally. I think it's both light spillage from lights as well as making the parking lot look prettier or hiding the parking lot from neighborhoods. And I do see a difference between it abutting residential versus abutting commercial.
And if you think about that, typically, you're gonna see more churches and schools in a residential neighborhood than you would commercial buildings in that residential relationship. So, is that more about headlights or is it more about aesthetics?
Well, I think, our Kingwoods and our Oaks would probably be the good examples where you have those two things happening together.
The what?
The Kingwood Street
Oh, yeah.
and the Oak Street
Yep.
are the places.
So
where-
kind of what I'm hearing is when it's in a residential setting, we're letting, we do wanna have the light trespass issue. If it's in a commercial, maybe a separate standard that's more about aesthetic.
Well, no, I'm not sure that's right, because I still feel like there's an aesthetic value for a church parking lot.
I'm not saying there's not, I'm just saying, but what I'm saying is in a commercial, I don't need a 4 foot high,
Oh,
80% opacity shrub,
I would agree.
because it's a commercial setting. If you wanna put some perennials instead, and some ornamental grasses that die off in the winter.
But that's what our ordinance is now, right? It's only if it abuts, you only have to do the 3 foot, 4 foot screening, well, 50% opacity screening if it abuts a residential, right?
No, that's pretty much for every
Everything.
parking lot.
Okay, I thought it was abutting residential only.
Yeah, abutting residential, then you have to go up to a 6 foot.
Okay, that's what I've got confused, okay.
So I think we got direction we want. Again, we'll keep it high level here, we'll get detailed with you guys.
All right.
This is why you hire a landscape architect.
Can you help me understand, why you wanna plant trees within 10 feet of the property line or the right of way?
So, I think we go jump there, comments we have there. One, within the 10 feet of the property line right away, that's to reinforce when you're driving, down the street, the boulevard, that kind of feel of having that. We did have a comment in here, Jennifer and Mike, of, instead of saying all plantings required shall be within 10 feet, our thought was have at least one. Our concern was, right now, on one hand, we have our current ordinance that says 1 for every 3,000 feet of green space. It doesn't matter where you put it, you could you could put them all in the back corner of your yard.
So that was one of the things we're reacting to.
But on our thought of having all required plantings in the front yard is, now you have bare backyards and front yards that are only trees. So I thought if maybe have, at least one must be in the front yard. If you have a requirement of 2, that second one can be wherever you want it to be. We also had a question regarding the spacing. James did the calculation, if it's on the 45 to 60 foot lot width, if we do 1 per 25 feet, and on the 65 plus 1 per 30 feet, it comes down to essentially our exact same thing, 1 per 3,000 square feet.
No, but, if we go to 25 and 30, it would actually lessen our trees.
Oh, we have actually less trees than our current.
Because right now our zoning, and we could put language in here too, our current zoning code makes you round up.
Yeah.
So we could make, we could either round up or reduce numbers.
It's less trees, but they're in a more specific location.
Yeah.
So, so you could argue that either way, and that was sort of my suggestion, was to push them up to the front, just to take advantage of urban canopy on the streetscape. But, if you had less trees, but they were all, if you had more trees, but they're all in the back, you don't have that front yard, character. But if you have at least 2 in the front, on those smaller lots. But I mean, again, that's sort of like telling the homeowner, yeah, you gotta plant here, it's kind of a.
What if it's both? What if you say you have, your total number of trees is 1 per 3,000, and you have to plant 1 tree per 25 feet, then whatever the number ends up being, it is, you know what I mean?
Which one takes precedent?
They're both applicable.
You're saying one's gotta be up front, yeah.
Yeah, cause then
In the
you're
front
saying
yard, we could just say in the
you
front
have to
yard.
plant at 1 per 25 feet in your front yard. And your overall calculation is at 1, so if you cover it, okay, but otherwise
You
it could,
still have to cover it.
yeah.
Cause right now, a typical, when we do a review for like a Northtown lot, it's usually, you know, kind of the small to medium sized one is about 3 trees that are, you know, made to be planted, and maybe some of the real large ones is about 4. So that's, if you kinda get an idea, that's what our current.
My one question was, you know, on a 50-foot lot, is 2 maple trees in the front yard a lot? Again, when they're new, when you know they're young, it's not going to be. But I try to think,
You're a bird.
20 years down the road where they've got a 6-foot diameter and they're 30 feet tall, 2
Yeah.
of those in your front yard, is that going to be, again, just you're not even going to see the house? I don't know. That's
Fine.
you know, I think of my old house in North Brainerd. We had a spruce tree that was technically in the right of way, but it was 1. I could not imagine having a second tree
one, yeah.
in my front yard.
And so then that argues, canopy or overstory tree versus specimen. Then you get into tree specificity.
Would it be better to determine type over number in the front yard? Which is what the planning commission has done before, like with the, I'll use it like Harrison. You specifically talked about trees with canopies. So, you know, a canopy tree in the front yard.
Yeah.
And then,
Versus a
yeah.
crab apple or something.
But if the trees are overgrowing and becoming a problem, there's nothing preventing anybody from cutting down that tree and planting new smaller ones, right?
But it's such a nice tree.
Well, then they're not gonna cut it down. Well, I mean,
Well,
you don't get it, but I just don't think you can draft or you can wordsmith the perfect, you know, the end all be all for this. I think
Right.
You err towards more trees and then you deal with, oh, we have too many trees. What cities say that? We've got way too many trees here. We gotta do something about these damn trees. Nobody says that, right? Oh, maybe they do. Do it?
Well, like in Minneapolis, the park board controls the boulevard trees, period. Nobody, I mean, it's the park board, cause it's about their larger parks and open space, assets.
That's same here.
Yeah.
We don't do that in St. Paul,
What do? You have a street tree department?
Mhm.
Public Works does trees, I bet.
pretty much, yeah.
I think the only other thing, I think in landscape, we have some stuff we'll talk to you guys with on the 6th. Yeah, we'll get there. I guess maybe
That's
2 other
awesome.
things. The one we have, or I'll quickly on incentives for additional green space. We're wondering if you just want to move that, because that only works if you have a parking requirement. Right now, we really don't have parking requirements anywhere, and if anything, the discussion that's been having is talking about parking maximums, not parking minimums. So I don't know if this tying parking to additional green space
Yeah.
works. And then I know this is from our code, so it's not you guys, our current code all says other incentives is approved by the city council. I don't know what those incentives are.
Yeah.
Because things like stormwater, we're not gonna say like you have to do less stormwater, because that's not on the table.
Yeah.
Stormwater is stormwater, MPCA says you have to do certain amount of stormwater, that's the fact.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what the other incentives for additional green space would be unless it's I don't know, we waive the permit fee?
And to me, that's about, and this is applicability where there's a very intense use or intense uses going on, like a downtown or something where you wanna get a little more green space in the environment versus impervious parking surface, but I don't know if it actually applies that much here.
Personally, I feel like it's something we could just write. I've never had anyone ever actually come up to us about like, again, you don't have parking requirements right now anywhere except residential areas. Yep. So-
It's funny because when I read that, I did not take it as being only about parking. Like, I took it
Page 3.
as,
Residential and stuff.
yeah, I took it that,
Four dash, four dash,
that it
four
could be
green space.
applicable to anything.
Page 3, halfway through the packet.
Because like, if you're, like in our residential, a few of them, like TM stuff, we have, what, 65% or 75%? And it's, if you could come up with a creative way to reduce it, whether you get some kind of incentive, that's how I took it. But I also do open space developments in other places that are residentially based. So that, whether anyone's asked for it or not, but my interpretation was that it wasn't just about parking lots. Whether or not you use it or not is a totally different statement.
Well, is that used? I mean, are there other examples of what those other incentives might be then?
But I didn't know if you guys were doing this regularly, so.
Okay.
That, like, that was your language, that was in.
And then
like-
there's that question of, going back to the residential, do we want to be reducing our off-street parking requirements in residential areas?
Yeah.
I think the argument is
Oh,
no. Cause
So
then,
we could-
my only thought is, I could then see someone trying to convert a single-family detached house to a duplex, and then getting away from the parking by, I'm gonna add additional green space.
Yeah, this language encourages that conversation of entering into that negotiation of
Yeah.
trying to reduce the spaces. Whereas if we struck this, they could still enter into, I mean, it could be, if it's really something it could be a variance or something, they could try to show some hardship or something.
Mhm.
They
Yeah.
could still,
Yeah.
so I'd be comfortable striking.
The other thing we had, I think it's the last thing on this, that we'll talk about with the commission is, you go ahead.
So there's certain requirements, within parking lot design to have, essentially like an island in there. And then essentially what do we do with those? Right now, there isn't a tree requirement. I know a lot of cities do have those. So kinda wanna get your guys' input on.
Right now, it just says that it shall have plants. It says off-street parking facilities with internal parking rows of 20 or more spaces shall incorporate, irrigated landscape islands. Landscape islands shall be a minimum of 6 feet wide. It doesn't really say that at least 50% of the interior landscape area shall be covered by living plant materials such as sod, shrubs, ground cover, or trees. So it allows for trees, doesn't require trees. Do you care?
what's missing, I think, from those is it's all promoting raised and curbed. What about, I think Denver used the rain garden example, or an infiltration area with some sort of plantings in here that, they would almost be like a number, Roman numeral 5 in there that maybe allows some sort of stormwater management.
So kind of the,
It-
number one, it talks about in lieu of irrigated islands, drought tolerant.
Yep.
But you also could say in lieu of islands, rain garden.
You can
Or
have
some
rain
kind of-
garden, and then in 447B, you would have to put wheel stops and things around it so cars don't flop into the thing, but it's still, it's passable for sheeting of surface water.
That's what they do it on Baxter. In Baxter, the Essentia Clinic on Baxter, it was, when I went out there, it was so strange, because they have it's at level. So you're going along, parking spot, at level, tree.
Yeah,
And,
that's the tree trench.
Okay.
That's what I was
Is that
asking.
what that
Yeah,
word meant?
those are tree trenches.
okay.
They're pretty cool.
Well, at first I looked at it, I thought that's the strangest thing I've ever seen, but then when you start to think of stormwater while
Yep.
coming in, it starts to make a lot of sense.
Yep.
Why do we want to put this natural dirt space up, 8
Above.
inches? It makes no sense at all.
It does kind of serve two purposes then, you're getting that landscape element, but it also lets the developer another creative way to tackle their stormwater.
Yeah.
On site, without using up maybe other green space for that purpose. Put it where the problem is.
Yeah, and the Arboretum, probably don't get down there every week, but they have some great parking lot designs that deal with just pure stormwater. It's really good examples.
That's all we had on the landscaping, the rest of it. What's up with you guys on the same spot?
All right.
Any other party comments on Division 4?
We put some stuff on fences.
The only thing, I just wanna bring this up real quick, is give it a fence height of 6.5 feet and no more than 8 feet. I mean, do we wanna allow 8-foot fences in the residential district?
Depends on the neighbors.
I don't see that they're.
There are some,
Go ahead, no, please.
there are some homes that are close enough together and have windows facing each other that I have heard some, I've heard some interesting arguments coming through my house about who does and does not protect the other person's privacy, or, you know, who
Okay.
doesn't wear clothes in their house, that sort of thing. But,
You like that 8-foot fence, is that what you're
8-foot fence
saying?
sounds like it would solve some problems for some people.
All right, thanks.
There are pets too that can jump 6-foot fences, though. I don't know if that's a
Yeah.
factor also, but that's definitely has come up before with.
And right now, I think 8.5 is only allowed
just
if it's
abutting
abutting, like, commercial property.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not dividing residential properties per se.
The biggest question I think we had on the fence thing
Yeah.
is an issue we regularly deal with, where the language of the ordinance and the diagram of the ordinance are, in my opinion, do not match.
Yep, well,
You look at A and B of 4:14. A, 4 foot anywhere, okay? But B, except as prohibited in section blank, a fence up to 6.5 feet high may be erected for the line extending from the front facade to the side lot lines and along the side lot lines to the rear lot line. However, when you look at the design, on a corner lot, it makes it look like I cannot extend a 6-foot lot fence to the street, my side lot line and down. And I don't see that in 4-4 14B.
Yeah.
And it causes a lot of angst,
so,
because it's just, James and I don't see why we can't allow it to go all the way to the property line. Again, there's already site triangle language in here.
Yeah.
So the diagram has to be
The
fixed.
diagram needs to be fixed. There's still that caveat of, you know, if you do a 6-foot fence and it runs along your side yard and you are in a corner, it still can't be in front of that, if you have someone behind you in front of their front facade. But depending on where they're at, so there's that control, but it can go all the way as far up as it wants, assuming it's not going in the front of the person behind your front facade.
if I would go back to our discussion about setbacks at corner lots, I would think that same logic would apply to the 6.5, that it would have to tie into the corner of the building to the interior property lines and not to the street. You know what I mean? So as drawing A is done, I feel like that's consistent with that 6.5 has to start at the corner of the house and go to the sideline. You know, and again, regardless of building orientation, I think, right? Is that the language in there?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So I use this as so for example, if the front of this house on diagram A is facing where it says street right of way, then yeah, the front, you couldn't have a 6-foot fence past here. However, if the orientation of the house and the front of the house is up here, and this is not the front yard, this is the side yard, I don't see why a 6-foot fence can't extend to the street as long as it's not in front of this property here. In diagram B, there's a blank lot here. Or blank, it looks like what looks like a blank lot, not necessarily a dwelling.
Yeah.
So I don't see why, there's no dwelling here, so why couldn't the 6-foot fence go all the way to the street if the house is facing north?
A lot of properties that we deal with are essentially next to an alley,
Yeah.
and not next to an adjacent property.
And that's what, you know, assuming there's no house behind you, and that's what we're getting at. We get a lot of people who are like, why can't my 6-foot fence, I have to have this weird green space, you know? And then they feel like we're taking their backyard, we're cutting their backyard by a third, because they have to have this 15-foot section on their side of the house that they're not allowed to have within their fence.
If I would plainly apply the standard in B to put a house in the middle here of diagram B, oriented along street right of way, and that 6.5-foot fence would have to tie into the corners of the house and go to the side lines, right? And again, I think because of the corner lot, it complicates things, but it feels to me like if I were to apply B there, I would tie it in to the left side of the house, that top left corner of the house, and bring it to the left property line, and I would take the bottom right corner and drop it down to the, and it seemed like that would be the eligible 6.5-foot area. Interpreting B as it is, from the front facade of the principal building to the side lot lines.
Again, part of this, it doesn't tell, the item is bad because it doesn't tell you
Yeah.
what is the orientation of the house. I think we were assuming, again, and whichever the house was shifted is what I'm getting at, where the north side is the front orientation, and where it says right away, that's actually the side yard.
I think part of what would help that is we'll use a real example, no names included, of an alley and a non-alley house to diagram. As opposed to that, because that's very generic, and you're right, there's not enough context for even annotation for that matter, so.
So there are no differences in the diagrams themselves, yet a lot of language difference between B and C. And so it might be better if we didn't have a corner example in A, just so you kind of see what the intent of
Otherwise, the fence ordinance as we see it is fine. It's more of, again, it's that nuance of corner lots, side yards, where the 6-foot fence can go. We deal with that a lot.
How about the number of fences?
Number of
Like,
How many
fences.
paddocks are you allowed?
Not to,
You mean
bring on it,
inside
but
the
say
fence?
the neighbor I have who has a fence and then decided they needed another fence and put another fence, but still has the other fence, so they have like,
Concentric fences with a
they
moat.
have 2 fences.
Security.
You guys are gonna
I
need to
gotta say,
control the neighborhoods.
That's a new one. I don't know that I've seen that before.
No, so they weren't trying to subdivide their backyard for like pets or goats or anything, it was just a fence inside a fence.
Yeah, they put up a privacy fence without removing the old fence or tying the 2 together.
Is it a chain
They
link?
just,
Is it-
yeah, they have a chain link and then they put a privacy fence.
Internal fence,
But
5-year
there's
permit.
like a 3-foot gap, 4-foot gap between the 2 of them.
No, the DNC.
Yeah, to clarify, under the current ordinance, you can put, the only time we actually need a fence permit is if you are within the required setback. So if you are, further in like that, you wanna have like a puppy pen, like a garden fence or like a puppy pen. You can do that.
Or if you want a fence around your greenhouse.
Want a fence around your patio, as long as it's within the set, if it's,
It sounds like you're out of luck. That's what I'm hearing.
Oh, it's been there for 6 years, it's fine.
Other discussion items, or questions from Jennifer, Mike, David? Happy holidays is in good order. Hearing none.
You have a few more, this is a regular meeting.
Yep, the hearing none, I think we'll thank Mike and Jennifer for your time. I do wish you have safe travels if you're driving tonight, or you hunker down. New business, we have none. Public forum. Open the public forum at 8:50. Is there anyone online, James?
Council member report, anything?
Tiffany, thank you very much for joining us. And
Yes.
I apologize for not acknowledging you at the beginning of the meeting. Heck of a time to say, hey, welcome. Is anyone online, James?
They are a hardy
Hardy Barty bunch.
Candidate
If they
for
are, get them an application for
future
something.
commissioner.
We got terms ending.
Anyone on WebEx? No.
We got no one online, so with that, then I'm gonna close the public hearing at 9:51. And with that, David, Community Development Director's report, please.
I have one item, Mr. Chair, and I'm gonna try to be brief. Just trying to get this out there where we can. You may have seen some things in the news media recently regarding, some proposals to do some crypto mining in the city of Brainerd. We just wanna get out there what has transpired. In short, the city of Brainerd was, contacted by an entity that's happened really quickly over the Thanksgiving, by one entity looking to do some, bring a crypto mining operation to the city of Brainerd. Brainerd has become a unique target in that we have an excess level of available power, or a capacity that we can give power. And our northern climate also makes it ideal for such an operation. So we had one entity, B&D Power Solutions, approach the city in November. I think it was in November. They came out, met with Brainerd Public Utilities. Brainerd met with Mr. Bergman, I was on paternity leave at the time. Toured a couple different areas in the city, went and saw the industrial park, and then submitted on, I think it was November 18th, submitted a letter of intent to purchase 2 lots in the industrial park, and submitted a check for $10,000 in earnest money. 3 or 4 days later, the city also received a letter of intent from Cloud Properties for what was originally at that time 2 lots, also in the industrial park, requesting 10 megawatts of power initially, with the availability of 10 megawatts of power at the end of the year. B&E Power Solutions, by the way, was requesting 50 megawatts of power. At that time, Brainerd Public Utilities says, we have enough capacity, we can do that, we're comfortable with that request of 70 megawatts. Those requests got brought, well, I say the request, got brought before the Economic Development Authority, the EDA, on December 2nd. At that meeting, the only direction that the EDA took was to request that the council convey land to the EDA for the purpose of these sales. The reason we always like to have the EDA doing the sale of any public land is they hold the power we call right for reverter. So we can put things in a purchase and development agreement that if certain things are not met, a project doesn't happen or other such, the EDA has the ability to get the land back. Cities do not have that ability. In the time that the packet went out for the EDA meeting, the city received one amended letter of intent from Clow, and then on December 3rd, received a 3rd letter of intent from Clow. Again, the only action that was taken by the EDA was to convey land, was to request that the council convey land. On December 6th, the council considered those requests and conveyed the land to the EDA. On December 9th, the EDA took up, now that they had the land conveyed, actually held a special meeting at which both entities were allowed to present their proposals. The Cloud Properties' final proposal was one that was considered. Their 3rd proposal included the 2 lots that were initially asked for, and the 2 lots that B&D Power was also asking for. The direction that the EDA gave was to direct staff to start entering the process of negotiation for land purchasing / sale with both entities. One thing we just want to make clear is that when it comes to the sale of power to either entity, the city charter is very clear that that is fully under the umbrella of Brainerd Public Utilities. So it'll be Brainerd Public Utilities who will ultimately determine who gets what amount of power. Jennifer and I kind of refer to this as kind of a chicken and the egg. On one hand, both entities want to make sure that the city would sell them land before they sign new agreements. There'll be 2 different agreements, one for the purchase of land with the city or the EDA, and one agreement with Brainerd Public Utilities for power. On one hand, they want to make sure they can get land before they sign agreements for power. On the other hand, they're not going to sign agreements for power, they don't have land. So one of them had to come first, so the land went first. So both agreements will be they're separate but contingent on each other. So right now, where we are at the process of working with our legal counsel to develop purchase and development agreements for the purchase of land. And then each entity is also working with Brainerd Public Utilities on the power aspect. BPU does have a board meeting on December 21st. I believe at that meeting, intention is to give their staff direction on how to move forward with these requests and to negotiate contracts for the purchase of power. So we just wanted to be getting that out there, making sure all our commissions are aware of what has transpired and how it has transpired. Beyond that, Mr. President, Mr. Chair, I have nothing.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you. It would be nice if the city would be in the position to be able to work with BPU to allocate the number of jobs per megawatt given. And, you know, because it's exciting to think about these tech things coming to Brainerd and, you know, and bringing more tech jobs here. This doesn't sound like it's super intensive on tech jobs, but what are the things that might be affiliated with that really bring a different kind of industry to Brainerd? That'd be really exciting, you know. And then you get your megawatts, employees per megawatt satisfied there. But thank you for that. Yeah, that's been an interesting event. It would have been fun to actually sit in those meetings rather than read.
On YouTube.
I believe the December 9th EDA meeting is the most watched video on the city's YouTube page.
Yep, I was there, I watched it.
All right, with that, thank you, David. Commissioner questions and comments, Don?
Got
Start
none.
with you.
None, I'm good.
All right, very good. Well, with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?